Harry Potter, Dimensional Wizard. Chapter 121, 10 Rings Council, 3. After reading the document, the new council member quickly realized that he might have made a mistake that would cost him his career, so he apologized. The meeting then continued. How is the research on cracking the reincarnation spell that the leader of the death cult used? Asked Amelia. One of the reasons that this cult is so hard to remove is because their leader used a special spell that allowed them to reincarnate after death. To be precise, the spell chooses a random person to inherit the memories, ideas, and beliefs of the previous cult leader. Then, the new leader will secretly start spreading the ideas of the death cult among the population. With this method, every time the Empire kills one leader, another person will just appear replacing him, making it virtually impossible to get rid of the death cult. So far, we only know a few things. First, the chosen person is always non-magical. Second, after being chosen, the non-magical person will also develop magical abilities. However, we have never detected any mana from the leaders' bodies after capturing them. Could it be another power system unknown to us? Most likely. However, this does not change the fact that we do not have any method to deal with the situation, especially since we know little about what power they are using. So, what should we do in this situation? I think it's best to increase the manpower of the division in charge of dealing with the death cult. Ask the army to intervene and lend some soldiers, said one of the 10 rings. That's a good method. Let's discuss the number of people that will be allocated, added Amelia. After discussing and negotiating on the allocation of the army, the next issue was brought up. Surprisingly, the council member who was in charge of this issue was Percy Weasley. Dressed in a luxurious magical robe, he stood up and said, "There has been a rise in the number of N.E.T.S. as the East called them in the Empire. According to recent statistics, 5% of the Empire's population does not work, study, go to school or contribute anything. All they do is play games on Skynet. 5%? With a population of 50 billion people in the Empire, this is a total of 250 million people. That's too high," asked one of the council members. "We have provided free education, healthcare, and even provided great wealth fair to people to alleviate people from the worries of living cost, and to encourage them to contribute to the Empire, but this does not seem to be enough. We even prevented the widespread use of golems or robots to leave certain jobs open to these kinds of people, but now it seems to be useless. Do we know the reason for their behaviors?" asked one of the 10 rings. "It cannot be just because of addiction. One focus potion is enough for them to get rid of this kind of addiction. Plus, they can easily get access to many psychologists in Skynet. According to surveys we did in analyzing these people, we came to the conclusion that they resent the fact that they are not wizards, but in the game, they can experience having magical abilities," replied Percy. "So, it comes down to the class difference between magical and non-magical. Although mage tech allows ordinary people to wield magic, it's nothing compared to real wizards. Adding to that the fact that the majority of wealth and influence is in the hands of wizards who are the minority in the Empire, this has indeed become a problem," analyzed one of the 10 rings.fl.m. "The issue we have to deal with now is those unproductive people, not the class problem that is plaguing the Empire," responded another 10 rings counselor. "We can just prevent them from logging into Skynet, forcibly stopping them from playing games all day." "That's a terrible idea. I can already guess that if we did something like that, the suicide rate would drastically increase amongst these people. In that case, we limit the time that they log in, and pass a mandate to them that they have to work for a certain amount of hours every week." "That could work, but I do not like this solution." "Excuse me, but I may have a solution to this problem," suddenly said Percy. Everyone then looked at him, waiting for him to continue. "As you all know, many people resented the mandate to donate their emotions to create the lesser stones. The Empire has received much critics for this reason, but now, we could use this situation to ourselves. We could use Skynet to gather emotions from these groups of people alone, not having to bother the general population." "That's an excellent idea. These unproductive people can finally have real values, and the critics of the Empire will be decreased. It's better to announce to the public that this was the Arcane Emperor's idea, thus increasing his prestige and control over the Empire," said one of the 10 rings. Many people secretly cursed after hearing this, thinking why they did not think of this first. Amelia nodded her head. "This is indeed a good plan." She then looked at Percy. "Do you have any other ideas regarding this subject?" "Yes, Council Elder. We can secretly give these people soul link access to make it easier to gather emotions. However, to ensure their safety, more soul-soothing potions have to be given to them. Re-W.C. Since this is your idea, you can be in charge of handling the process." Percy immediately became excited after hearing this, while many people nodded at this young man's political talent. Of course, a few people despise Percy and think that he only got to this position because of how powerful the Weasley family was. After Percy presented to the council, they spent the next few hours discussing the different issues of the Empire. After everything ended, Amelia sat in her office, pondering about the recent meeting. Most of the issues the Empire is currently facing can be summarized to the fact that it is too young, and many people have not forgotten the old days. Although the concept of countries was abolished, the older generations still identified with the old countries and passed these ideas to the new generation. In other words, not as many people identified as citizens of the empire as they should. There is not enough unity. Adding to that the rapid advancement of magic and technology, the problem became more aggravated. Amelia paused as she tapped her fingers on her desk. There are currently two ways I can think of to deal with these issues. One is to wait. As time passes, these old ideas will slowly be forgotten, and people will slowly recognize the autonomy of the empire. The other is to start an intergalactic war where we are forced to band together to face a foreign threat just like the Dementors' invasion. After making a brief plan, Amelia sent the information about today's meeting to Edward, along with her thoughts on how to solve the current issue. Chapter 122 Preparation. A small floating island that was invisible to the naked eyes traveled in the clouds. Vast energy emanated from it. In the middle of the island lies a palace that looks eerily similar to Asgard's palace from the MCU. This was the royal palace of the Arcane Empire, the residence of the Emperor, Edward Bones. In one of the main bedrooms, he sat with his eyes closed, while his long black hair reached his back. Suddenly, he opened his deep blue eyes and muttered, "Another defeat." As soon as he said those words, a little fairy with purple hair appeared next to him. She was a few centimeters in height, had two pairs of small wings constantly flapping. "Master, you do not have to be discouraged. This time, you lasted longer," said the little fairy. "You do not have to console me, Morgana. I'm not that fragile." That's right. The little fairy was the physical manifestation of Edward's artificial intelligence in his gate, Morgana. Edward used Voldemort's soul as material to give birth to her. So, she is essentially a real artificial intelligence. Of course, as someone who has seen the movie Terminator and countless others about the potential danger of artificial intelligence, he also took precautions. When creating her, he used a small part of his soul as well as Voldemort, so she is part of him. Additionally, since she has a real soul now, he placed the most stringent contracts on it, thus making it impossible for her to go rogue. "Summarize the results of the past few years," ordered Edward. Then, a keyboard appeared in front of the little fairy and she began to type. Edward knew that she did not need to do such a thing. However, her personality is showy and whimsical, so she often does weird things like this. "In the past 30 years, you fought a total of 14,234 simulated battles with the individual labeled as Death God, Herpo, and you have lost all of them. Based on the fact that Herpo's abilities are only estimated based on the information we gathered on Authority, it can be guaranteed that his strength will be even greater than estimated, not lower." "Is there any good news at all?" asked Edward. "Yes. Every time you lose, your control of magic increases drastically. Having an unbeatable opponent has proven to be very helpful to your growth, Master, allowing you to absorb and learn to utilize all the magical knowledge of the Empire. Additionally, according to De Leon basic law of soul, the more knowledge a wizard learned, the more powerful their souls become. Since you have learned all the knowledge of the Empire, your soul has drastically increased compared to a few years ago. I never understood why wizards like to place their names in front of their discoveries and newly invented spells. How narcissistic of them. Master, you've done the same thing as well, Freenu.0. Do not focus on the small stuff. I'm sensing there is a but. What is it?" Morgana paused for a moment, "But, in the past 2 years, you have made little to no progress." Edward was silent for a moment as he felt the mana rushing throughout his body. Over the past few decades, his mana still remained at the 3-limiter level as he had not found a way forward yet. So, he followed the path of magical beasts and stored mana inside his body's muscles, bones, organs, and magic veins. As a result, his physical strength and magic resistance have increased dramatically. So did his mana reserved. "It seems that it's about time that I leave," muttered Edward. "Master, I think it would be best to wait for both Project Magic Core and Project Uranus to finish before leaving," warned Morgana. "Show me the recent progress of Project Magic Core," asked Edward. Then, a holographic image of a bunch of wizards' experiments appeared in front of him. From what Edward learned from Albion, other wizards or mage civilizations in this universe follow a similar path. They all have a magic core. Of course, each civilization calls it differently, like mana core, mana room, mana pool, etc. After a wizard's mana reaches a certain level, it will fill the magic core, thus preventing them from further gathering mana and growing. When that happens, they will use different methods to expand the magic core to be able to contain more mana. After hearing this, Edward asked him if he knew the method of expanding the magic core, and the dragon responded negatively. According to him, dragons have a completely different system than ordinary wizards, as they do not have magic cores, but dragon heart. Dragon heart is essentially an organ made of pure condensed mana, which is one of the reasons that dragons are so powerful creatures. As for the reason that Albion had a magic core after being born, according to him, it was because the environment did not allow him to create his own dragon heart. So, his body adapted to the situation and created a core based on information from his memories and surroundings. As such, Edward started to research a method of his own. Immediately, he had the idea of enchanting his magic core with the extension charm which had the ability to expand internal dimensions. Unfortunately, even with his knowledge of how to enchant the soul, he failed after so many decades. After checking the slow progress of the magic core project, Edward sighed as he shook his head. Both these projects are not nearly close to being completed, so I cannot wait. Moreover, I have not given up on the idea of following the Xianxia idea of liquefying mana. It would be best to do so, then expand the magic core. That way, our civilization would have an advantage over other magical ones in the future. As you wish, Master, added Morgan helplessly. So, what's on my agenda for today? First, there is the recent council meeting. I will send you what happened directly to your mind. Morgana connected to Edward's soul, then sent him all that happened in the meeting. An intergalactic war? That's indeed a good method. However, the target should be chosen carefully to properly control the flow of the war. Send my approval to my aunt. What's next? Your mother and father called you while you were still fighting in virtual reality. Call them back. A few seconds later, a large screen appeared in front of him, and two middle-aged people dressed in casual clothes, hugging one another appeared in front of him. Mom, Dad, are you guys on Venus? Yes. We suddenly wanted to take a vacation, so we chose here, said his father. So, how was it? It was fine until the royal guards came and started protecting us. As if we needed their protection, complained Edward's mother. Well, I understand your frustration. They even follow me everywhere. As you know, Auntie Amelia complains a lot when I dish them, talking about proper royalty protocol. So, just ask them to enter stealth mode, then pretend like they are not here. That's indeed a good idea. Then, Edward's mother, who was also called Morgana, rushed out of the frame. Meanwhile, Edward's father, Edgar Bones, looked at his son and asked, "Are you preparing to leave?" Edward paused for a moment before nodding his head. His father sighed out loud. Is it dangerous? Yes. You know that I support all you do, but your mother has become more sensitive after being revived. So, do not tell her, and make sure to create a way for her not to find out. Edward nodded his head, and once his mother returned, the family had a long conversation about many things before ending the call. What's next, Morgana? The Empress is waiting for you to have lunch. What about the other imperial concubines? Most of them are preparing for the inspection 3 days from now. Edward, who was in a large bath with many maids bathing him, continue. You have to attend the launch 5 days from now. Is there anything else? Yes, Master. Recently, I have noticed that the stress level of Imperial concubines Fleur Delacour has risen quite significantly compared to usual. I'm afraid that she is quite worried about the inspection. You should probably do something about that. Edward pondered for a moment, then he said, if I remember correctly, I've prepared gifts for all of them for the next 100 years. Take one of them and send it to her with a card saying that everything will be fine. Do not forget to copy my handwriting. Wait. The last time I had you copy my handwriting, Luna discovered the truth and I was labeled as insensitive. All of them except for Bellatrix did not talk to me for 3 months. So, I'll write the note instead. Chapter 123 Inspection. After taking a shower, Edward went to the dining room where he saw Rowena sitting and waiting for him with a table full of different kinds of dishes from different parts of the world. Like Edward, she was wearing the robe of Archmage from D&D, but hers was blue, while Edward's was white and grey. Powerful magic could be felt from these clothes due to how powerful they were. My Empress, said Edward as he kissed her on the cheek, to which she just smiled at him. How have you been? Not very good, replied Rowena. Did something happen? Asked Edward, who was preparing to put a piece of bread in his mouth. Unfortunately for him, a magic light hit his hand, preventing his movement. I have not checked for poison yet, said Rowena as she stared at him. Then, white light flew from her hand to the food as he used the spell poison detection. Meanwhile, Edward rolled his eyes to indicate that she was overcautious. His body is modified to create a new organ to store poison in case he was indeed poisoned. Plus, he still has nanites in his body to deal with the issue in case the poison sac did not work. After checking the food, Rowena motioned for him to start eating. So, why are you not happy? I don't know, maybe because you are leaving without me. We already talked about this. You can go with me on the next voyage, but not this time as it's too dangerous. Even you admit that it is dangerous, so why not bring us to support you in case of danger? Nevertheless, Edward was adamant about his decision. In that case, why not wait until Project Uranus is finished? That way, your safety would be more guaranteed. I cannot wait that long. Plus, it's not like I'm being as reckless as the first time. I have prepared for many things for my departure, even my possible death. I have left a piece of my soul here, so if I were to die in the void, with enough soul crystals, I can revive myself. And if I'm unlucky enough to encounter a being that controlled causality and managed to destroy the piece of my soul left all the way here, I left a copy of my consciousness somewhere to be transferred to a clone. Although technically speaking that this kind of resurrection would just be another soul with all my memories and abilities, it's still better than nothing. Rowena sighed as she knew how stubborn her husband can be, so she did not mention this topic anymore. The two ate breakfast before spending a few hours together, then Edward went to Academy City, while Rowena had some diplomatic affairs she had to deal with. Scene break. Academic City, 7th Magic Tower. Luna Lovegood stood at the very top of the tower, looking in the sky, a little distracted. Suddenly, a voice sounded around her. Master, someone is requesting entry to the tower, asked the tower AI, which is more often referred to as Tower Spirit. Who is it? It's the Emperor. Let him in. Soon after that, Edward appeared on the highest level of the tower. With a smile on his face, he walked behind her to hug her. How are you doing? Not very good. Why is everyone not feeling well recently? That's because of your selfish decisions, replied Luna calmly. She sighed out loud. I've tried to look at your future, even to see the most basic information of the amount of danger you will face, but I could not see anything. I even almost accepted their offer, thinking that they might have the power to help me divine your future. So much for the noble seer bloodline. There is no need to blame yourself. Plus, I'll be fine. And under no circumstances should you even be communicating with these things until we know for sure what they are, replied Edward. The two remained quiet for a while as they stared at the blue sky. Although they have seen such a sight countless times, for some reason, it appeared different today, it appeared more beautiful. Do you remember what I said to you countless years ago when you started courting me? Asked Luna as she turned around to look him in the eyes. You said that the only reason you accepted my advances was that fate told you that we were meant to be together, but you refused to easily accept this fact. So, I had to work extra hard to gain your approval. Luna raised her hand to caress his face. You have to survive and come back, otherwise, you will never gain my approval. As you wish, my queen, replied Edward as he embraced her tightly. 3 days later. Academic City. Amelia, the 10 Rings Council members, along with a few other ordinary council members stood waiting for something. Surrounding them were a few hundred soldiers dressed differently. Some had armors shined with magical light, holding things like swords, spears, or bows and arrows. Some had modern combat uniforms with guns, while the others had long staff in their hands, dressed in magical robes. Despite the differences of these people, all of them had one thing in common. They all had an excited look on their faces. After a few minutes of waiting, they finally saw what they were waiting for. Something came flying from afar, landing in front of the council members. Welcome, Your Majesty the Arcane Emperor, said the army as they knelt on one knee. As for the council members, they placed their right hand to their left shoulder, their left hand behind their backs as they saluted him. El.M. The only person not doing anything was Amelia. After landing, Edward smiled after seeing the pose of the council members. As a transmigrator, the greatest pleasure is to change the world to your liking. And, for anyone who does not know, their pose is the one from Attack on Titan. At ease, said Edward before focusing his gaze on his aunt. How are you doing? Please do not say you're not doing all right as well. Having a rough few days, asked Amelia. You can say that. Well, mine has not been good as well. Another argument with Susan? Yes. I just do not understand why she wasted all her potential by becoming a painter. What's wrong with painting? She likes it, and is very talented and successful. I know this, but I just think that it's a waste. She could do so much more if she focused on magic research. Sigh, I just do not understand how things turned that way. It's actually very understandable, replied Edward. She spent most of her lives under the shadow of the Arcane Emperor's cousin, with many people often comparing her with me. So, it is completely reasonable that she chose a profession completely unrelated to me. I never thought of it that way. Maybe you're right. I should probably stop bickering with her and her parents as much. FWE.co. Yeah, let the poor girl live her life the way she wants to. While these two were casually conversing, the other members had to pretend not to hear anything, or even exist. After all, this was related to the royal family's personal affair or drama. It was not their turn to intervene. After chatting with Amelia, Edward finally looked at these people. Alright, let's begin with the tower master inspection. Let's begin with the second tower. However, as soon as he finished, a commotion occurred around this group. Chapter 124 Inspection 2. A man dressed in armor with a sword in his side rushed to the delegation where Edward and the council members were, yelling, Your Majesty, I just want a few minutes of your time. However, none of the guards listened to him. They gave him a warning not to approach, but the guy did not listen. So, the members of the royal guards attacked. One of them created a fireball 10 meters in diameter, rushing straight to that oncoming visitor. However, the guy took out his sword and slashed the fireball into two, thus completely negating the attack. Unfortunately for him, what followed after the first spell was a rain of bullets. Nevertheless, this guy was quite skilled. Controlling the mana from his core to strengthen his muscles and nerves, he swung his sword so rapidly that he blocked most of the bullets. But a few still managed to hit. Luckily for him, his armor was powerful enough to block some of these bullets except for the enchanted one. However, once these bullets hit his skin, a white light flashed on his body, protecting him. Seeing that the opponent was more skilled than anticipated, they prepared to use more force to take him down. However, they all stopped as Edward raised his hand. Seeing that no ordinary wizard knights are as skilled as you must have some sort of reputation. "So, who are you?" asked Edward. "Your Majesty, my name is Mark Griffin and it's a pleasure to meet you," replied Mark while breathing heavily. "Oh, you're the wizard knight who created the method to condense the shield and layered it around the skin to increase protection. Your method was quite ingenious and has revolutionized the wizard knight path. So, what do I owe for this visit? It is my honor for your Majesty to know me. The reason that I'm imposing on you is that I would like to ask your Majesty to find a way forward for us wizard knight. If I remember correctly, didn't Tower Masters Adola Obi and Ahala create a way for wizard knight to place enchantments on the body, thus allowing them to increase their strength beyond superhuman levels? This method has many flaws, plus it is not the right way," replied Mark with a stubborn look on his face. .com. "So, you're one of those mana purists who believe that the path of wizard knight lies in finding better ways to control mana to strengthen the body." Mark did not say anything. Edward gave him a look before saying, "The sad truth is that wizard knight is a very new field with little knowledge to go on, so progress will indeed be slow. Adding to the fact that most of you are very stubborn and might even hold some prejudiced notions clearly outlawed by the Empire, it is no wonder that your general progress has been slow. So, my advice to you is either slowly develop your field as you have been doing, or work with other branches of the wizard knight path that have been created. The Eastern wizards have recently identified the energy known as Ki and its relationship with mana. Many of them have been trying to recreate martial arts based on their cultures. So, maybe you guys can try discovering the concept of aura, and whether it is the same as Ki." Mark's eyes light up after hearing, got on one knee to salute Edward before departing. Meanwhile, one of the Ten Rings Council member hurriedly said, "Your Majesty is wise, always guiding our civilization in the right path when we are blind." "You do not need to praise me," replied Edward with a smile. "Over the years, I have greatly supported all types of artists from writers to movie makers, to game designers. All because I want the Empire to take the wild ideas from these people's minds and try to turn them into a reality. Unfortunately, not many people have discovered such benefits. Many people had a sudden realization. Over the years, they all thought that the reason that His Majesty supported these industries was that his cousin was a painter, but it turned out that he was using them as an idea machine to further develop the Empire. After figuring this out, the gaze that these people looked at Edward became more respectful, their reverence for him drastically increased. As the commotion ended, the group headed to the second magic tower for the inspection. "Did you plan all of this?" asked Amelia through mind communication / Luna's prediction. "She wanted me to use this event to further stabilize the Empire before I left." Scene break. The group entered the magic tower, and the first thing they saw was Narcissa Malfoy and Soleil Greengrass. After a brief introduction, the group was teleported to the 5th floor where her main research took place. "As you all know, many years ago, I researched placing a magic beast's soul into a human," said Soleil. "At first, the majority of subjects died due to their souls being destroyed. However, after implanting a non-magical soul into a human body, one subject survived and transformed, to be precise, a genetic transformation." Soleil showed a video of the first patient she mentioned. In the video, the subject displayed the ability of echolocation. Unfortunately, not many people in the council paid much attention to this information as she showed the same thing in the last inspection. Nevertheless, they knew that this was an introduction that would lead to her real experiment, so they waited patiently. This mutation was the result of the connection of the soul and body in the life code. So, after placing the soul of a bat inside of him, he acquired the animal's echolocation ability. Meanwhile, during that time, I conducted a different experiment that resulted in similar results, added Narcissa. After implanting the organ of a werewolf inside one of my subjects, she did not acquire magical abilities as I speculated, but her gene also mutated. The subject displayed an increase in strength, reflexes, acquired sensitive smell and even grew fangs. After that, the two of us started working together. We placed different animals' souls into people's bodies. Although only a few survived, they all underwent genetic mutation and acquired some characteristics of the animals whose souls were placed inside of them. By studying these individuals' genes, the Empire's genetic technology developed rapidly to the point of being able to genetically modify the body without implanting another soul into the body. "Fellow Tower Master," interrupted one of the council members. "We all know that the Empire's current genetic technology is due to all your efforts, but please show us your recent findings instead of wasting time." Both Narcissa and Soleil glared at the person who spoke, and that person was immediately scared as he remembered that these two were wizards that have broken through their third limiters, and are classified as walking city destroyers according to the Empire. Despite being outraged, these two did not say or do anything else. So, they continued their explanation. "One of the failures of our research has always been the fact that most magical animals' souls or organs, after being implanted on people, would always lead to death. However, recently, after implanting the soul of the newly discovered magical beast Niwas, a new power was discovered." A video appeared in the air showing a few different individuals. One of them was levitating things around him, one was floating in the air, while another was banding a metal plate with a wave of his hand. However, none of these individuals had any mana. We have discovered a new energy in their brain which is currently labeled as psychic energy, added Narcissa with a hint of joy on her face. Unfortunately, she was one of the few who thought that way. Is that it? Said the previous council member. Telekinesis? There are countless spells in the Grand Arcane Library that grant such ability. These words instantly made these two upset, however, they soon realized by these council members' facial expressions that many other people felt the same way. Although angry, Narcissa and Soleil did not say anything as these council members would decide the number of fundings they will receive for the next 20 years. This was a method to balance the rising influence and power of wizards, especially Tower Masters in the Empire.fwe.c. Meanwhile, Edward, who was silent for most of the time, finally spoke. You guys fail to see the potential of this discovery. Your Majesty, how so? Everyone looked at him, including Amelia, who also was not that impressed with this discovery. Let me paint a scenario for you guys. Our arcane empire encounters a civilization that studied magic extensively and has even developed anti-magic technology. They managed to bypass our security system and dropped an anti-mana bomb on Earth, rendering all our technical and magical creations useless, thus turning our civilization back to the Stone Age. How is that possible? Why is it not possible? I've warned all you countless times not to get complacent of our achievements. The Arcane Empire is not the only magical civilization existing in this universe, and we are way too young compared to the vast majority of them. The council members quieted down after hearing this, then someone asked, what does the scenario have to do with anything? The answer to such a problem is right in front of us, replied Edward with a smile. This psychic energy is a brand new power system not inferior to magic in terms of potential. As such, we can build an entire system based on it. For example, if we could recreate all our magical and technical advancements to make sure that they run on psychic energy instead of mana, then we can deal with the scenario I just spoke about. Not to mention that there may be things that psychic energy can do better than magic, so we can take advantage of that and combine the two together just like we did with technology. These council members finally understood the importance of Narcissa and Soleil's discovery. So, after discussion, they agreed to increase the number of fundings for these two so that they could better develop psychic energy. Then, the group headed to the next tower. Chapter 125 Inspection 3. Ninth Tower. The council delegates walked inside to see someone waiting for him. However, that person was not dressed properly and only had a regular shirt and jeans with a lab coat on. Tower Master George Weasley, where is your brother? I'm Fred. Sorry about the mistake, WVL.co. No problem. As for my brother, our shop is having a week-long discount, so he's attending to it. The council members were speechless after hearing this. Oh, did you guys come up with a new catalog of joke objects? Asked Edward. Show me. Immediately, George showed Edward a holographic image describing some of their new inventions. Oh, a potion that allows people to taste color? That sounds interesting. I'm sure you guys went through the proper review before selling them, right? Of course, Professor. We are law-abiding citizens. Yes, said the guy that just lied to officers of the Empire by taking his brother's identity. Professor, why can you always tell us apart when even our mother cannot? We even developed special magic to make us indistinguishable. For one, I always assumed you guys were lying about your identity. Plus, I have a few tricks up my sleeve. Do tell. Suddenly coughed Amelia lightly. All right, let's get back to business, said Edward. Then, George led the group to show his result. So, he led them to a room that was generating massive amounts of electricity. However, all the electricity was directed to another connected room that had a massive floating crystal ball with blue light in the middle. As you all already know, our task was to create a magic item that could convert other energies into mana. After many experiments, we discovered that electricity could be converted into mana.fwe.c. Although a large amount is needed for even the smallest amount, with nuclear power plants, the amount of electricity generated is nothing, explained George. Excellent, added Edward. Although the solar system has plenty of ley line nodes that generate mana, we can never be too sure whether one day they will stop. However, with this method, we will not have to worry about mana in the future. Let me see the data for the experiment. After receiving and reviewing the data, Edward said, it should be possible to also convert solar energy into mana if you change the enchantments a bit. On the spot, he designed the basic enchantments to accomplish this, then he said, you guys can finish the rest. Professor, I was planning to take a vacation, complained George. Then do so, but get back to work after that. However, if you procrastinate longer than necessary, the royal guards will arrest you to send you back. Ignoring George's angry look, Edward and the delegates headed for the next inspection. 8th Tower. Cedric, how have you been? How is the wife? Everything has been fine, Professor. As for Cho, she just transferred to a new team, so she has been busy with Quidditch training. That's good. Now, let's begin. Nodding his head, Cedric led the team to show them his result. What appeared in front of them was a gigantic spider with 12 legs. For the spider eyes, there was only a giant red glowing orb. In front of you is the 8th generation AG-23 spider golem. It comes in 3 modes: water, earth, and sky. After Cedric Diggory said that, the spider started to fly under his command. Then, he led it to the large ocean that was inside the room. The spider's legs entered his body as it floated on the ocean, acting like a boat. Finally, it dove deep inside the water, resurfacing a few minutes later. It can serve as both a weapon and a reconnaissance drone. Many modern and magical weapons including laser cannons appeared from the spider's body. Some of the cannons shot elemental magic, and one was enchanted to shoot bombard a spell. It can scan a planet's basic conditions, search for life forms, minerals, and plants. It can even serve as a mining golem, although not as efficient as one. Its multipurpose abilities more than made up for that. Controlling the holographic screen in front of him, Edward asked, "Can they be mass-produced?" "Yes. With the recent 3D printing technology that is enchanted with the same enchantment as the Room of Requirements, as long as the necessary materials are available, they can be mass-produced. This is indeed a great invention. With this, the Space Fleet's next expedition will be much safer," commented Edward. Fifth Tower. "Neville, how are you doing?" "I'm fine, thank you for asking, Professor. How about your mother and father?" "Your grandma?" "Father and mother are fine, they are now working at St. Mungo's Hospital. As for Grandma, she is quite healthy. And she asked me to hand over some tea she personally made for this inspection." "Tea? You can hand over it to me now," replied Edward with a smile. After doing so, Neville said, "She wanted me to thank you for supporting my promotion as Tower Master." "There is no need to thank me. You are one of the most talented herbalists of the Empire. You deserve that title. Now, show me the result." Inside a very large room that was expanded with the extension curse, an enormous tree stood in the middle. The tree was as tall as a 10-story building, the leaves on them were entirely blue. In the dark, they might glow. Powerful energy could be felt coming from them. As soon as the delegates walked into the same room as the tree, the wizards amongst them instantly felt like their mana was alive. Their minds became clearer, and using magic became easier for them. After years of studying, with the combination of genetic engineering and herbology, the mana tree was finally created. After being planted on a ley line node, they absorb mana from them and release it on the surrounding through photosynthesis. More importantly, the mana in the surroundings did not dissipate after being released, but remained active in the environment. "Excellent job, I knew that I could count on you, Neville," said Edward. "What about the effect of the tree on the nodes? Have they shown any sign of activation?" "Yes, they do, however, the process is very slow. According to our calculation, even the node with the least concentration of mana would take more than 500 years to activate. As for the more powerful one, an estimate of over 100,000 years is the smallest number we could calculate." "That's indeed too long," replied Edward. "Could the process be accelerated if the tree was planted all over the world at the same time?" "It's possible," replied Neville. "But there is not enough data to support this claim." "Then study. As you wish. This should be enough to placate death and not make him act rash. As long as he has hopes to activate the ley line nodes to escape, he should continue to remain patient as he has been in the past few decades." So, the group headed for the next tower for inspection. Chapter 126 Inspection 4. First Tower. Edward walked inside with the council delegates following him. The first thing they saw was a breathtakingly beautiful woman dressed similar to Edward. Her magic robe shone with magical light, giving her both a regal and mighty presence. Without caring about anyone else, Edward hugged her and kissed her. After lightly reciprocating, Hermione said, "You're in front of people, act more appropriately." "Why do people keep telling me to behave? As a ruler, shouldn't I be able to do whatever I want?" complained Edward. "No, on the contrary, as an emperor, you have a certain image and reputation to uphold," replied Hermione with a stern look. "It's not like these people will say anything," added Edward as he looked at the council members, who quickly looked away, pretending not to see anything. Of course, the exception was Amelia. After seeing how she was glaring at him, Edward knew that it was time to get back to business. "All right, you people always take the fun out of everything. Hermione, show us the result of your research." She then led them to a room with a man in deep meditation. An image appeared in front of everyone with data from the experiment. After years of experiment and testing, Project Magician is finally completed. Many people became excited after hearing this, especially the non-magical members of the council. "Your Highness, could you please elaborate further?" asked one of the council members. However, he soon realized that he made a mistake by speaking before the Empire and hurriedly apologized. However, Edward just waved his hand to motion him to relax. Then, Hermione continued her explanation. "Through experiment, we discovered that by gathering mana and condensing it on a specific spot, a core can be formed. It is similar to the Philosopher's Stone. The user's soul combined with the mana to form a small crystal containing a small dimensional space inside that can hold mana." She then showed a video of 2 people slowly creating their cores. The person was in a specifically designed room that had mana in the environment. As you can see in the video, we have discovered 3 places that the core can be made: the heart, the brain, and the navel or dantian as the Eastern cultures referred to it as. However, the best and most effective place seemed to be the heart like wizards. What are the qualifications needed to become a magician? Asked Edward. Could anyone become one? All the excited people quickly calmed down, listening to the answer to that question. Unfortunately, no, replied Hermione. She showed them a different type of date. According to our experiments, two things are needed to become a mage. One is the ability to sense mana. After many studies, we discovered that many people do not have that talent. Without the ability to sense mana, it's impossible to gather or control it. Your Highness, how do we sense mana? Asked one of the council. We have developed meditation techniques for that, and even potions to aid in the process. Nevertheless, depending on their talents, it is easier for some people than for others. Have you discovered any factors that decide talent to sense mana? Asked Edward Slash. So far, we have discovered that people with more powerful souls are more sensitive to mana. People that are more spiritual by nature, and people with higher IQ tend to be more sensitive. Additionally, according to one of our studies, the optimal age for people to sense mana is between the ages of 8 to 11, however, children that age usually have a harder time focusing on meditation. It's similar to when young wizards and witches developed their magical abilities. Is there a certain age requirement to become a mage? Asked Edward. So far, we have not discovered any. Some subjects who are over the age of 100 years have managed to become mages. However, the process took longer than the others. Edward pondered for a moment before saying, since deep meditation is the key, we can develop a set of basic meditation for children to prepare them beforehand. It can become a mandatory requirement of the curriculum for all the schools. That's indeed a good method. That way, when these children are detected to have magical talents, they could be prepared in advance, commented Amelia. Alright, you said that there were 2 requirements to become a mage. What's the second? The second requirement is something that we referred to as mana body. According to our research, not all individuals' bodies can properly bear mana. For some of them, mana is like poison. After entering it, it makes them sick. The second step of becoming a mage is to create magic veins in the body like wizards. Unfortunately, not all of them can go through that process as a result of that. While looking at the data, Amelia said, this mana poison could be a great problem once the ley line nodes are activated and mana returned to the surrounding. In an environment with a high level of mana, it is foreseeable that it will enter people's bodies unknowingly. Many people could get sick as a result. That's true. Let's put it in the agenda of things to study and solve, replied Edward. He then looked at Hermione and asked, what is the level of mana that the mage's core can hold? The minimum is lower than even some young wizards, while the highest level so far is 20 units of mana. 20 units of mana? That's 20 times that of an adult wizard. This amount is a little far from the amount before the first limiter, commented one of the council members. Is there any way for the amount to increase, just like it does for wizards after breaking the limiters? Unfortunately, no. As recently discovered, the limiters are both a bloodline restriction of wizards and a restriction of the world. Since mages do not have bloodlines, they do not have such restrictions. So, if they want to increase the mana in their magic core, we have to find a way to expand the interior dimension of the core. Unfortunately, the research of the Empire has not had any result as of yet. What about the growth of mana? Can mages naturally produce mana as they grow up like wizards? No. Wizards' mana is also a product of their bloodlines. If a mage wants to increase his or her mana, they would have to draw it from the environment, or potions. So far, mages sound like an inferior version of wizards, complained one person. Are there any advantages that they have? There are. Since mages have to begin their journey by sensing mana in the environment, controlling it, and entering their bodies, their general control over mana is much better than most wizards. Furthermore, in the future, when the ley line nodes are activated, using spells will require to control mana in the environment to increase their strength. Mages will have a way easier time doing so than wizards. Many people finally felt relieved after hearing this. Meanwhile, Amelia was thinking to herself. Project Magician was supposed to decrease the discrimination and division between the magical and non-magical citizens of the Empire. But now, it's more likely that it will further divide people into mages, wizards, and ordinary people. I need to prepare for this in advance. She was not the only one who discovered the issue. However, Edward did not place too much emphasis on this kind of thing since he had his aunt do it for him. So, he asked another question. You said that there were 3 places where a magic core could be made. Have you tried making 3 cores at once? Yes, we have. However, the result was that as soon as the second core was made, it immediately resonated with the first one, resulting in both of them being destroyed. After that, the subject has lost its ability to wield magic forever. Edward reviewed the data one last time, then said with a smile, since everything seemed fine, we can begin a worldwide test for people with talent to become mages. I can see another boom in the Empire's rise in strength. Right now, the Empire had a total of 100 million wizards and another 15 million humanoid or intelligent magical races. That may sound a large number especially compared to the measly 5 million wizards before Edward announced the existence of magic to the world. However, compared to the 50 billion people in the Empire that spawn across the entire solar system, it's nothing. Of course, there is the issue of clones. Cloning wizards is possible. Unfortunately, only 1 out 100,000 clones will be born with magical abilities, while all the others turned out ordinary. Still, with the Empire's ability to mass-produce clones, it's not a big problem. Unfortunately, the magical abilities of these clones are truly weak due to their weak souls. Even a 12 to 13-year-old young wizard could easily defeat them. As such, they are mostly used for cannon fodders or experimental subjects. After finishing the inspection, Edward prepared to go to another tower. However, he received a mental message from Hermione. If you secretly leave without saying anything, I will never forget you. My love, you should know that I'm not that insensitive. If that was the case, you would have taken us with you. We discussed this long ago. Next time, you guys can accompany me. Chapter 127 Inspection, v. Third Tower. In front of the tower's entrance, a beautiful woman with silvery blonde hair that fell nearly to her waist. Her large blue eyes displayed a little nervousness. Just like Hermione, she was wearing a gorgeous robe of the Archmagi. After arriving, Edward kissed her as well. However, unlike Hermione, Fleur Delacour did not admonish him for his behavior, nor was she embarrassed by the public display of affection. Truth be told, she became calmer after the interaction. Free-evl. So, after Amelia's reminder, she led them inside the tower, then began her introduction. As you all know, I was in charge of Project Wizard, which was the task to find a way to turn ordinary people into wizards through bloodline transplants. Unfortunately, it was proven impossible to do so. All the people who were injected with both magical and wizard's bloodline died tragically due to rejection. Fleur showed them a bunch of videos of clones and ordinary people who had seizures, with blood coming out of all the orifices of their bodies. Even after purifying the bloodline of these magical animals, the process was not successful. On the contrary, the rejection became even more prominent. The string of failures continued until Project Magician was successful. Mages with mana protecting them can indeed survive the bloodline transfusion process and become wizards. She showed them the subject that survived the operation. However, the council members who were excited about this news quickly noticed something odd about these people. As you can see, these bloodline wizards have inherited some of the characteristics of the magical animals that their bloodlines came from. For example, growing tails, claws, reptilian pupils, scales, etc. Through training, they can return to their normal self, but once agitated, they can easily lose control. Nui.c. Did they inherit the animal characteristics of the magical animals their bloodlines came from? Asked Edward. That's correct. Through our study, we discovered that ordinary magic animals cannot be used for bloodline transfusion. For example, we cannot just take the bloodline of a Niffler and place it on a mage's body. We have to first purify its bloodline. However, by doing so, we have discovered a strange will in these bloodlines. And in the process of the transfusion, the mage has to fight and conquer that will. Failure to do so will usually destroy their souls. However, even if they succeed, the will remain in their bodies, slowly affecting them. While reviewing the data of Fleur's experiment, Edward said, based on the life code, their bloodline seemed completely different from ours. That's correct, replied Fleur. To be precise, our bloodline could be considered a human bloodline. It may have originated from magical beasts in the past, but after years of passing it down, it has turned into something new, something unique to us humans. Although we have lost many bloodline abilities, in exchange, our bloodline has become more stable, more versatile, and with fewer restrictions. Edward nodded, then said, we can slowly develop ways for them to control their urges or instinct, and study better ways of bloodline implantation in the future. Now, what about Project Dragon God? After hearing this, Fleur paused for a moment before leading the group to another floor of the tower. On that floor, there were many rooms with glass windows. In one of the rooms was a gigantic blue dragon with horns in its head. It looked similar to Albion. In the other rooms, there were many other four-legged true dragons, while a few had dragon eggs. After years of research, I've only managed to recreate the Ice Dragon King through bloodline purification. As for the other dragon's eggs, they only turned into true dragons, but not dragon kings. To be honest, I'm at a loss. I cannot find the reason for this phenomenon. Some eggs can create a dragon king, while the others just created ordinary dragons. You do not need to blame yourself. If I'm correct, this has nothing to do with you. Oh, do you have a theory? If I guess correctly, then each Dragon King is unique, and there can only be one in existence in the entire universe, replied Edward. Are you saying that the other Dragon Kings are alive somewhere out there in the universe, and the only reason that we managed to recreate Albion and this Ice Dragon King is that the previous one died, and this is a form of resurrection for them? Asked Fleur. Given the fact that they have some way to pass on memories through bloodline, it's not such a far-fetched idea. After one of them dies, once the new Dragon King is born in their races, he or she inherits the memories of the previous one, added Edward. Did you ask Albion about this? I did, but he refused to say anything no matter how I tempted him. While looking at the sleeping dragon, Edward thought to himself. It seemed that my plan to combine the bloodline of all the dragon kings to create a dragon god bloodline will have to wait. What's with this ice dragon king? Asked one of the council members. Why is it not moving? Ever since she was born, she immediately entered a state of deep sleep. It has been going on for more than 10 years. While everyone was chatting and overviewing the data of the experiment, Edward and Amelia were having a secret conversation through the mind. If what you said is true, then there is a high chance that someday, these other dragon kings will come to retrieve the member of their races. From what we know about Albion so far, we can deduce how powerful the dragon race is as a whole, and with their arrogant disposition, they will likely start a fight with us. I'm aware of this. Why do you think I'm in such a rush to leave to other worlds? Despite how prosperous the Empire looks, we have so many hidden dangers. Herpo and the dragons may not be the only ones. Only by acquiring other worlds' knowledge can our magic and technology advance rapidly to deal with these threats. After making sure that everything was all right, the delegate moved on to the next tower. 10th tower. 2 people waited for the council delegate, one was a wizard, while the other was a house elf. To be exact, a free elf. Before the Empire was established, the bloodline curse that was placed on house elves was removed, thus ending their servitude to wizards. The house elves who had regained their freedom could function normally, and with their magical abilities, proved to be invaluable. They were granted access to magical schools to learn magic, thus better developing their capabilities. After the Empire was established, they petitioned the council to officially change their name to the elf. However, the council, who was influenced by the idea that elves were a race of beautiful men and women, could not accept the name change. Experiments were then made to discover whether house elves were related to the elven race, but they were not. After their bloodlines were purified, it only decreased their ugly look a little, increasing their intelligence and magical abilities. In the end, as a compromise, the house elves changed their names to free elves. After arriving in front of the tower, Edward said, "Tower Master Abduiwuro, Tower Master Sali, how was your evening?" "Excellent, thank you for asking, Your Majesty." "In that case, let's begin." The 2 tower masters led the group inside. What appeared in front of the group was something that looked like a spaceship, except that it looked worn out and tattered. Furthermore, the design was strange, and the ship looked like it was very old. As you all know, many archaeological discoveries have uncovered relics about the Lemurian civilization that existed 12,000 years ago. As the precursor to modern magic and technological civilization, the Lemurian people did achieve interstellar travel, or at the very least, they could travel to other planets in our solar system, explained Tower Master Iwuro. In the past few years, the Empire has done a great deal in recreating their language. As such, we were able to analyze a little bit from this spaceship, added Tower Master Sali, the free elf. According to our discovery, the engine of the ship used something called elemental pools as a form of energy. Our current theory is that the elemental pools are created by drawing different elemental energies from other dimensions. To be exact, elemental dimensions. If that theory is true, elemental pools would essentially be the same as the Empire's Philosopher's Stone, a fundamental aspect that their civilization was built on. Edward looked at the data of their experiment. "Have you guys tried to find these elemental dimensions?" "Yes, we have, but it was not successful. For some reason, it is very difficult to gain access to other dimensions around here." Edward nodded his head as he was also aware of that problem. For example, it was very difficult to summon demons from hell even though he learned how to from the book, The Key of Solomon, that he stole from the Vatican. Additionally, the demons he summoned were very weak and useless. Any explanation for this phenomenon? We have asked other tower masters that studied dimensions, and the current theory is that the fact our solar system is a mana-dead zone makes it very difficult to access other dimensions. Additionally, they believe that the cataclysm that destroyed the Lemurian civilization may have severed our connection to those dimensions. So, when the ley line nodes are activated, will those dimensions also reconnect with us? "Well, this might be a problem," commented Edward. All of the people present had a high level of clearance in the Empire, so they knew many secrets. So, they immediately understood what he meant. After leaving the 10 tower, the delegate visited many others, while a few were left without inspection. Among them was the 4th tower. After the inspection, Edward and Amelia visited it alone. Chapter 128, The Launch. In the 4th tower, Edward and Amelia met Nicholas Flamel and his wife, who were the tower masters. The two led Edward to a floor that had an enormous city with powerful mana emanating from it. Many people could be seen working on the city as it was unfinished. Strange machines controlled by wizards could be seen engraving small letters on the ground, the buildings, or the towers in the city. Wizards used their staff to directly enchant some places. As you can see, Your Majesty, Project Uranus is nowhere near close to being finished. I know how difficult it would be to create the floating city with all the requirements that I asked for. So, I'm just here to check the progress, said Edward to reassure the couple. L.C. Nicholas nodded, then he explained the progress. The anti-gravity enchantments needed for the city to float is not a big deal, but the fact that you require it to serve as a spaceship that can survive in the void is a big deal. The entire city is made of magicium, so it will not be corroded by void energy, but the same cannot be said for the enchantments. As such, a powerful shield is needed to surround the city and protect it. This is one of the problems we are currently facing. As the group, they were led to a specific room deep inside the city. Inside was a giant blue stone the size of a football stadium. It was a philosopher's stone. With this philosopher's stone, we do not have any issue with energy to power the floating city. However, we do have some problems with the core enchantments FL.M. Edward reviewed the data. The reason that there was a problem with the core enchantments was that they were the same as his world gate. He wanted the floating city to have the ability to travel to other universes and serve as a base and weapons of mass destruction. That way, he would be capable of dealing with any trouble he encountered in the void. Unfortunately, as a result of this, the difficulty of creating the city drastically increased. Let's see, the shield has problems, the void cannon is absorbing too much energy, all the different enchantments are having a hard time connecting, muttered Edward. The majority of these problems is because our alchemy system is based on writing runes or words for enchantments. This system is fine for small objects, but when it comes to larger ones, things become more problematic, commented Paravel. The link enchantments method that your majesty created allows us to engrave many runes or words together, thus forming a larger and more powerful enchantment, but this method is more effective for homogeneous enchantments. When it comes to heterogeneous enchantments or amalgam enchantments, the problem becomes greater. At this rate, we might need another 50 years before even beginning the testing phase of the floating city, let alone make it operational. And that's just our best estimate. And, for a reminder of these enchantments, read chapter 40 again. Edward nodded his head, then proposed some suggestions on how to move forward. Edward, said Nicholas Flamel, I understand your need to explore the unknown, but, wouldn't it be better to wait until the floating city to finish before going to explore the void? That way, your safety will be more guaranteed. Edward paused for a moment after hearing this, then he said, At first, I created the Empire just to find people to help me develop magic. But as time passed, as I watched the Empire rapidly develop under my care, I've grown to care about it more than I expected. However, with this new attachment came the fear of losing everything that I created. You have no idea how many times I've woken up in the middle of the night because I had a dream that Herpo left the afterlife and destroyed the Empire. Or that some other powerful civilization discovered us and annihilated us. After hearing this, the three of them immediately realized that the man in front of them was the ruler of more than 50 billion people. And as a ruler, it was his duty to protect his people. Alright, there is no need for the mood to become somber. It's not like my trip this time will be like the last time. I've prepared plenty beforehand. The floating city is just a reassurance. A few days later, planet Jupiter. Edward and the council delegates used the warp portal to teleport there. As soon as they arrived, Amelia, who noticed Edward's absent-mindedness, asked, What's wrong? Just feeling a little nostalgic. I remember a few decades ago when I led more than 10,000 wizards to terraform this planet. It took us more than a month. But now, the Empire has the technology to terraform any planet in just a few hours. Isn't that a perfect example of the Empire's motto of in pursuing the truth, we will never stop progressing? True, replied Edward. Alright, let's witness this momentous event that will go in the Empire's history books. Soon, they arrived at a building where two people led another group, waiting for them. Arthur, how have you been? Asked Edward. Excellent, Your Majesty, replied Arthas Weasley. I would like to take this opportunity to apologize for Fred not participating in his Tower Master inspection. I'm used to their mischievous temperaments by now. As long as they do not forget to finish their tasks, it's fine. Don't worry, my wife and I will ensure that. That's good. So, how is Molly? She's also fine, writing a new book. Oh, I enjoyed her last book. All the little spells that help with housework were very interesting and unique. Hopefully, this new one will be as popular as the last one. After chatting with Arthur, Edward then looked at the other person standing next. The person immediately got on one knee and said, Commander Sherpard of the 101st Space Fleet salutes Your Majesty. At ease, Commander. The next operation will depend on you. The group was then led inside the building where a large screen was displayed. The screen showed a bunch of spaceships floating in space. Some of them were as large as a few hundred kilometers, while some of them were a few hundred meters. A special seat was created for Edward and the council members. After taking his position, he ordered, begin the live broadcast. Immediately afterward, all the citizens of the Empire from different planets started watching. They first saw Edward's face appear on their screens. With a smile on his face, he said, Hello, citizens of the Arcane Empire. Today is a great day for our civilization as we take our first step into the stars, traveling beyond our solar system for the first time in search of other planets with life, of other civilizations, and new knowledge. Many great men have chosen to risk their lives in this journey that may prove perilous. In honor of their spirit, let us take a few moments to offer them a blessing. Edward along with the council members stood up, and with a wave of his hand, a beautiful long staff with a blue stone on top appeared in his hand. He looked in the direction of the camera and said, May the arcane truth guide them in their journey. Immediately afterward, all the people of the Empire said the same thing at the same time. May the arcane truth guide them in their journey. After that, the broadcast showed the space fleet that was about to leave on this expedition. Arthur Weasley that had already made sure that everything functioned properly on the spaceships gave the all-right signal to Commander Shepard. The commander then connected to the captain of the fleet, activate the Void Drive. Chapter 129 Departure. The Void Drive is a new engine designed by Arthur and Edward together, to replace the old one that the Empire's spaceship functioned on. The old engine, which was called the Apparition Drive, was essentially designed to use apparition to teleport the spaceships to different parts of the universe. However, this engine had a problem as it required a massive amount of energy to function. The further the distances needed to apparate, the more mana needed. With the Philosopher's Stone as an energy source, it was no problem operating a few 100,000 light-years away. Any greater distance than then would require additional stones or a larger one. After seeing this problem, Edward designed a new engine based on his study of the void and his world gate. The spaceships would instantly appear in the void, outside of the current universe. Then, from there, they can teleport to any place in the universe. It did not matter how far that place was from the Milky Way galaxy. So, after the order was given, all the citizens saw was that the fleet turned into a white light, then a few minutes later, they appeared in another star system. Soon after that, the fleet reported their status, then started to search for planets with life. The broadcast ended, and the Empire celebrated this great event in history. Meanwhile, Edward was having a secret meeting after the launch.fewnewie.co. In front of him was a large screen that displayed an old man wearing a black hood. "Your Majesty, do you have any new orders?" asked Dumbledore. "The Empire just launched its first expedition in the universe, so I'm worried that something might go wrong, so I need you to look out for any information that you hear about us. From the information I've gathered over the years, only the Galactic Federation and a few other civilizations are on par with us, so why worry? That may be true when it comes to technology, but when it comes to magic, we still have a long way to go, especially when we have not dealt with our issue of the magic core no longer capable of holding more mana. In that case, I'll do my best." Edward nodded his head, then asked, "What about the mission I gave you? Any new information?" "Nothing has changed since I last reported to you. I've been trying to acquire any knowledge about gods and authority, but this kind of information seemed very closely guarded. The few magic civilizations that worshipped real gods are not that easy to infiltrate." "I understand, so you can take your time. There is no need to take any risks." After that, Edward headed to the small dimension that existed in the Bermuda Triangle, which has become his main laboratory with Rowena. In the center of the laboratory, there were two gates. After entering one of them, Edward had to place a room similar to the Room of Brain. However, it was smaller in size. After doing that, Morgana's little elf appeared on his shoulder. "Master, have you moved one of my servers?" "Yes, the main one will remain here in this universe, while the other one will go with me. Unfortunately, I doubt you would be able to connect with the main one from another universe," replied Edward. "Master, if you could use the full power of my main server, it would be possible." Edward sighed after hearing this. From Albio, he learned the real identity of these mystery rooms and how valuable they are in the entire universe. And after hearing about it, he was forced to remove all information about them from records, and erase the memories of the majority of people who knew of their existence, including Albion himself. He did not want knowledge about them to be accidentally released, causing some powerful cosmic entities to come after the Empire in search of these powerful relics. Additionally, Edward also finally understood one of the reasons that Herpo was able to use the Death Chamber to ascend from a mortal to a god. After learning of the true capabilities of these rooms, Edward decided to use the Room of Brain as a computer to create an AI connected to his soul. As a result of this, he gained unimaginable computing power, and with it, he rapidly propelled the technology and magic of the Empire. Unfortunately, he also knew that he was just using a fraction of the ability of these rooms. After placing the server inside the gate, Edward started to deal with all the things he needed for this trip. Midway through, Bellatrix and Rowena came to see him. Bellatrix handed him a ring as she said, "This is for your safety. Inside is more than 100 obscurus that can be controlled. If you meet any gods with the power of authority, this should be enough to buy you enough time to escape." Edward smiled after hearing this, then he gave her a kiss. Meanwhile, Rowena took out 5 small metal balls. "Inside is the latest result of my research. As you know, void energy is very corrosive or destructive, even more so than obscurus. I managed to condense a small amount of void energy and contained it in this metal case. If you encounter any trouble, you can just release them. Just one of them can release an explosion strong enough to destroy a planet the size of the sun. So, use them as a last resort in case the obscurus do not work, and make sure to not remain anywhere near the explosion." Edward nodded his head as he hugged the two of them with a smile. In fact, he was not immediately leaving as he still had 2 things to deal with before his departure. The first was a goodbye dinner with his family. His mother, father, Susan, and her parents, Amelia, and the brothers and sisters of his parents were also revived. His wives, Rowena, Luna, Hermione, Fleur, and Bellatrix all attended it. Although this was a farewell party, people had to act happy as they did not want Edward's mother to know that he was about to take a dangerous trip into the unknown. After the dinner, Edward held a secret meeting. This meeting was attended by all his wives, Grindelwald, Amelia Bones, Flitwick, Lily, and Snape. All of them sat at a long table with Edward at the head of the table. Behind him on the wall was the mark he placed on the Death Eaters, with the word Illuminati written in large letters. Before I leave, I have a few things that I need you guys to watch out for. He then looked at Grindelwald. As the commander of the Ghost Squad, I need you to monitor both the Atlantean and the Martian, especially the former. It is very rare for the Martians to leave their underground cities, especially with their current civil war. However, the same cannot be said for the Atlanteans. With how hostile their kind have been, you should pay more attention to them. I understand, but I still think that it would be best to either annihilate them or forcefully subdue them, replied Grindelwald. I have my reasons for not dealing with them for now. Edward then looked at Lily Potter. I'm sorry for what I did to you, it was just a calculated move. I understand, Your Majesty. I need you to do one last thing for me, then immediately afterward, Rowena will conduct a resurrection ceremony for you. On top of that, all the arcane points that I owe you will be compensated. What may that be? I need to absorb some luck from Harry. Will he be alright? Asked Lily with a frown on her face. According to my calculation, he should just be unlucky for a while but will be fine afterward. However, it's best to keep an eye on him. If you need, you can have a few members of the Ghost Squad looking after him. As you wish. Then, Edward looked at Luna. From the moment I leave, I need you to use the Sorcerer's Eye to monitor everything in the Empire. Do not miss the tiniest of anomalies, no matter how small it may seem. I understand, nodded Luna. Finally, Edward addressed everybody. All of you here have the highest power in the Empire after me, so you should know who our biggest enemy is. According to my calculation, Herpo should have the ability to leave the afterlife for a short period of time. If he does so, you can activate all the protocols I have left to deal with him, or stall him long enough until his time runs out. If he is proven to be more powerful than we can handle, I have left another gate here that will take all of you, including my parents and families, to a safe place. When I return, I will find a way to deal with him. And if I do not, the gate contains all the knowledge of the Empire, enough for you guys to rebuild our civilization from scratch. Edward, don't say such ominous things, scolded Rowena. I'm just being prepared for the worst-case scenario. After this meeting, Edward spent the last day with his family and enjoyed the bliss of his wives. For this special occasion, they allowed him to indulge in the pleasure of the flesh with all of them at the same time. The next day, Edward did not immediately leave. A feeling of nostalgia came to him, so he went to visit one last place, Hogwarts. Placing an invisible spell on himself, he visited many places, including his and Dumbledore's statues that were created to commemorate them. He then suddenly appeared inside the headmaster's room, startling Headmistress McGonagall. Boy, just because you're an emperor now does not mean that you can do whatever you want. Have some respect for the elderly, said McGonagall. Sorry about that, I thought you would not be here, replied Edward with a smile. I had some last meeting things to take care of. FOE.C. I'm sure Elphinstone would not appreciate you working so late. What can he do about it? Anyway, he's stuck with me. This time around, I will not even allow death to take us apart. Edward laughed after hearing this, then he took notice of the Sorting Hat that was muttering happily to himself. Sorting Hat, what has made you so happy? Edward, my boy, you finally came to see me after so many years. While you're here, I have some complaints that I would like to address. Do tell. Every year, many wizards attend Hogwarts, and it's my greatest pleasure to sort them in their proper houses. But all of them keep asking me to place them in Ravenclaw since it's the house you attended. I keep telling them that this is not how things operate. They refuse to listen to me. Some even threaten me with their parents' or family's power if I do not place them in Ravenclaw. I cannot stop the desires of these young children. However, you do not need to worry about their family's influence, as none of them dare to lay their hands on Hogwarts. In that case, I'm relieved. Edward then spent a few minutes talking to McGonagall and the Sorting Hat. Right before he left, the headmistress stopped him and said, I've heard a little about your next endeavors from Phileas. All I can say is take care of yourself. You have billions of people counting on you. Edward paused for a moment, then said, Thank you, and I will. Without any hesitation, Edward returned to the Bermuda Triangle, entered his world gate, then entered the void for his next adventure. ___________. Chapter 130, New World. The world gate floated in the white space known as the void. This place, which was the space between universes, was quite a beautiful sight to see. However, Edward had no time to admire it. Morgana, first activate the camouflage enchantments. As you command, Master, said the little purple-haired elf. Immediately after that, the gate turned white and blended into the surrounding. If anyone were to come next to it, they would think that they were just looking at the void. After seeing this, Edward sighed as he muttered, To this day, I'm still in awe of that old man, Merlin. I do not believe for a moment that the one I met is just one of the many clones of persona that he has scattered all over the omniverse. After complaining for a moment, he said, use Harry's luck to locate the next world. And while I enter cryosleep, record all the process of the voyage. No problem, answered Morgana. After entering a cabin, Edward entered a deep slumber. Meanwhile, the world gate who seemed to have launched onto something rushed in a particular direction. Not long after that, Edward was woken up from his cryosleep. For him, it felt like only a few seconds passed. How long have I been asleep? 120 years, replied Morgana. Edward nodded his head, however, he was not worried that such a long time passed back home as he theorized that there would be a difference in time flow. And if not, he just has to travel back in time using the gate once he returned home. He then asked, can you feel the location of our main universe? Yes, I can still feel Harry Potter's faded star. Can you connect to your main server? Unfortunately, no. Without much sadness, Edward then said, show me the site. Soon afterward, a projection appeared in front of Edward. He then saw a crystal sphere floating in the empty void. The source wall of another universe. What a magnificent cage, commended Edward. He then spent a few more minutes looking at it. Part of him was excited, while the other was scared. Since he had to use luck to locate this world, he did not know how powerful it was. Whether some powerful individuals or beings would be able to notice his presence or arrival. C. I need to find a way to be able to choose which world I go to. After taking a deep breath, Edward said, activate the reincarnation spirit enchantment and the temporal spatial energy prevention enchantment. As you command, Master. These two enchantments were given to Edward by Merlin. One of them prevents him from creating a disturbance when entering a new world by masking the temporal and spatial energy of the gate. The other one masked his presence and made him look like another individual of the world so that he would not immediately be identified as an intruder. However, Merlin warned him that these two enchantments were not absolute, and if someone was powerful enough, they would be able to instantly see through them. After Edward gave the order, the world gate blended with the source wall that surrounded this universe, then he entered it. Fewnewy.co. Soon after he found himself in a large city with people that looked European, and dressed similar to World War I. However, they were speaking a language that he did not know. Edward did not immediately leave the gate that was in invisible mode but waited for a few hours in case someone would notice him. After seeing no movement, he exited. Then, under his command, the gate shrunk to the point where he used it as pocket key. Unfortunately, in the past decades, he has not found a way to place the gate in his soul dimension. After leaving the gate, the first thing Edward did was use legilimency to quickly learn the language of this world, and have a basic understanding of the world he was in. In these people's minds, two words caught his attention, Amestris and State Alchemist. Immediately, Edward knew that he came to the world of Full Metal Alchemist. Immediately, Edward started to worry. With how powerful of a being that truth is, he did not believe for a moment that it did not detect his intrusion in this world. So, he pondered whether to retreat and leave in search of another world. However, a part of him was a little unwilling when he thought of the possible benefit he could receive from this world. In that case, I will wait 3 days without doing anything. If it contacts me during this time or warns me, then I will leave. If not, then I will slowly start to test the ground. After making a preliminary plan, Edward rented a hotel while dealing with some problems he encountered. Morgana, use the nanochips to scan my magic core? As you command, sir, said Morgana, who manifested herself in the little elf appearance. A few seconds later, she said, from the scan, it seems that you can only use 25 units of mana, while the rest are unresponsive or locked. My theory was correct. Since other universes follow different laws and regulations, an outsider like myself will suffer some backlash or restriction. The problem does not seem to be too big, said Morgana. From what I detected, your body seemed to be slowly adapting to this universe. So, your magic core should start working properly after a while. How long will it take? Since I do not have enough data, I can only roughly calculate that you should be regaining your full strength between 3 months to a year. Edward nodded his head without caring much. Even with his mana that is less than breaking the first limiter, only one person could pose a threat to him, truth. Even the father of the homunculi is not his opponent even after he managed to swallow God. Of course, Edward also knows that the reason that father was so weak was that he was plotted by Hoheinum and the Elric brothers. Additionally, he could still use the mana stores inside his body in his muscles and bones. Just like that, 3 days passed and nothing happened. Edward only stayed in his hotel without leaving. Master, I've hacked the radio signal of the military and found news of the people you asked me to look for, said Morgana. Oh, where are they? The Elric brothers headed north to the city of Lior. Is that so? In that case, the plot has just begun and Isaac McDougall just died. However, the entire plot happens in just a few months, so I do not have much time if I want to intervene. After making a decision, Edward finally left his hotel. He planned to get back to his old job in his younger days, a thief. Using an invisible spell, Edward operated all over Amestris stealing knowledge about alchemy. And he did not stop at books or manuscripts. No, he read the mind and memories of all the famous alchemists in the country to steal, no, acquire their views and understanding of alchemy. He even visited Dr. Marco, the creator of the Philosopher's Stone, to get the recipe from his mind. After doing this non-stop, he used gold that he brought with him to buy a house and create a lab for himself. Then, he began to study the knowledge he acquired. Chapter 131 Alchemy. Edward sat in a chair in front of a fireplace. Numerous books floated in front of him as their pages kept flipping on their own. And as quickly as those pages flipped, as quickly as Edward absorbed the information inside. Once he was finished, he muttered to himself, "Damn those alchemists. All of them are so paranoid that all their research is in code, making waste so much time and effort." After complaining, he walked to one of the empty rooms. He took a piece of chalk, then talked out loud. Alchemy is the scientific technique of understanding the structure of matter, decomposing it, and then reconstructing it. If performed skillfully, it is even possible to create gold out of lead. However, as it is a science, there are some natural principles in place. Only one thing can be created from something else of a certain mass. This is the principle of equivalent exchange. Although this is a summarization of alchemy in this world described in many books, it is not completely accurate. Although most alchemists clearly state that their practice is science, alchemy also involves things that the majority of scientists would consider pseudoscience. For example, things like spirit and the soul. After talking out loud to himself, Edward used the chalk in his hand to draw a circle on the ground. One of two essential components of alchemy is the transmutation circle. Just like wizards, alchemists cannot accomplish such miracles without the need for a power source or energy. In their case, they use the energy from the movement of tectonic plates deep in the Earth's crust. The transmutation circle served as a way to allow the energy to flow within a controllable range determined by the alchemist. After making the circle, Edward drew a few more runes inside the circle. The second essential component of alchemy is runes. Runes served as a formula to guide the energy trapped in the circle to do their desired outcomes. After finishing drawing the alchemic runes that looked like a few triangles placed together, Edward placed his hand on the transmutation circle and activated the energy needed. Soon afterward, electric light flashed in the center of the circle. Then the ground turned into a spear standing at the very center. Looking at this, Edward had a pondering look on his face. To become an alchemist, a gate of truth is needed. From what I know from the anime, it was stated that all living beings have their own gate of truth. Does this rule apply to every being in existence across every universe, or just the one in this world? Since I can perform alchemy, meaning that I also have a gate of truth, then the answer should be the former. However, there is also the possibility that the laws of the world affected me and created a gate of truth for me after entering this world. Furthermore, if only the laws of this universe allow people to perform alchemy, then this knowledge might be useless to the people of the Empire. Wait, not necessarily. If the gate served as a way to allow ordinary people to sense and control energy to perform alchemy, then wizards would not have such limitation. They can be trained to sense tectonic plate energy in the Earth's crust to perform alchemy. Wait, I'm thinking too small. Alchemy is an art that can be performed with different kinds of energy. Alchemy of Xing uses something called dragon pulse as energy, while in Amestris, the soul can be used as energy to conduct alchemy. So, there is no reason that mana should not work. After coming to that conclusion, Edward did not immediately test his theory. In his first attempt at alchemy, he felt something wrong with the energy he used. From the anime he watched in his previous life, he knew that alchemists in Amestris did not actually use energy from tectonic plates or earthen energy, but the Philosopher's Stone inside Father's body, as he is connected to an underground system that travels all around the country. As a result of this, Father can prevent all alchemists in Amestris from being able to perform alchemy by disconnecting them from the power source, the underground system, he controls. Knowing this, Edward began to truly connect to the earthen energy that alchemists were supposed to use. After a few trials, he succeeded. Electric lights appeared in the circle, then an axe appeared this time. Nodded in satisfaction, Edward proceeded to use mana as energy to perform alchemy. Immediately afterward, a giant axe appeared in the middle of the transmutation circle. The axe looked like it was the weapon of a giant. Edward calculated that if his body was not strengthened by mana, there was no way that he could lift that axe. Well, that was unexpected, muttered Edward. It seems that mana served as an amplifier for alchemy. No, the mass of the axe should not increase as alchemy follows the law of equivalent exchange. With excitement, Edward quickly did a few more experiments. Mana can actually allow me to break the law of equivalent exchange just like the Philosopher's Stone. Well, this is wonderful news. After that, Edward spent the next few days learning alchemy and doing experiments. With his knowledge of science that was far ahead of this time, World War I, and his natural ability to control energy, mana, he learned everything quite quickly. Now, it's time to perform human transmutation and meet truth. Without getting answers from it, I'm not relieved to do things. Plus, I need to confirm a few things about the gate of truth. If my theory is right, it could fundamentally change my trajectory in life, and the trajectory of the Empire. ________________________________________________________________________________________________________ Chapter 132 Human Transmutation. After absorbing and digesting all the knowledge he acquired about alchemy, Edward was prepared to attempt the ultimate taboo in alchemy, human transmutation. So, Edward drew the transmutation circle along with the runes for the process. He did not use the same one either Edward Elric or Izumi Curtis used. Instead, he designed it himself based on his understanding of the human body and life code. That way, Edward knew for sure that he could create a perfect body with alchemy. In fact, he tried to make a clone of himself before this and succeeded. Just like Edward Elric said in the anime, the chemical components of the human body are actually quite cheap and can be bought for a few cents at a store. After designing the entire transmutation circle, Edward placed a bone in one of the spots. This bone belonged to the random person that was about to be resurrected. The reason that human transmutation is believed to be impossible is because of the law of equivalent exchange. After all, what can equal the value of a soul? Of course, it's another soul, muttered Edward. After that, he brought one living prisoner and placed it inside the circle. To be sure, let's place another. So, he placed another. After everything was finished, he began to transmute. Electric sparks appeared as the chemicals materials for the human body slowly started to change shape. Based on the soul data of the bone, a new body was created. It was an individual with red eyes and brown skin, an Ishvalan. After the body was created, the soul was next. Edward tried to recall the soul of that Ishvalan and brought it back to his body. Unfortunately, a rebound occurred during the process. Failed? Why? My calculation was correct. Soon after that, an eye appeared in the middle of the transmutation circle. Luckily for him, he did not have to pay any toll as the two people inside the circle was the toll he prepared beforehand. So, the two prisoners along with their souls slowly decomposed in front of him. And after that, he was swallowed by the eye. Soon, Edward found himself in front of a gate. The first thing he noticed was that the gate had the design he placed in the Death Eaters, an Ouroboros with a pyramid inside. Inside the pyramid was a lotus with a single eye at the center. After seeing the gate, it opened and swallowed Edward. Then, countless knowledge about alchemy was instilled inside his mind. Since he paid an entire body plus a soul as toll, he learned plenty of things. Nevertheless, it was still not enough. Edward had the urge to swallow all the knowledge inside the gate. Of course, he still controlled himself. After being sent out the gate, Edward was a little distracted as he reviewed what he learned. So that's why I failed. In this world, after a soul dies, it does not go to the afterlife but turns into energy that flows through the world. This is in line with the alchemy theory of Izumi Curtis that all is one, and one is all. So, even if I recreated the dead Ishvalan's body, his soul has long returned to the universe, so I cannot call it back. In short, human transmutation is impossible at least in this world. So, you finally figured it out, foreign wizard, said a vague shadowy figure. Who are you? Asked Edward, not surprised that this person knew his identity. Don't you already know? I thought it would be polite to ask. So, foreigner, for what reason did you come to see me? Truth, your highness, should I call you that? Or, you can call me what you want. In that case, I'll just call you Truth. So, I have a few questions I would like to ask you if that's all right with you, said Edward. And I cannot guarantee that I will answer them. That's fine. First of all, am I allowed to interfere in the affairs of this world? Truth paused for a moment, then said with his usual smirk, I'm surprised that this is the first question you asked. What if I said you're not allowed? Well, this is your world, of course, I would listen to the owners. Interesting. I pegged you for an arrogant wizard who despised being known as gods and so on, thinking that they can do whatever they pleased in their search for strength. But, you're rather, what's the appropriate word, malleable. Well, you're right about me, but I also know when to bow to the circumstances. If I was as strong as you, of course, I would not be so amiable. Straightforward, I see, said Truth. As for the answer to your question, you can intervene as much as you like, but you cannot kill anybody. Even the homunculi? Even them. That's fine by me, replied Edward. Second question, what is your relationship with the Akashic record? What do you mean? Asked Truth, whose smile faltered for a brief moment. In my world, there is a legend about something called the Akashic records. It is said to hold all the knowledge, thoughts, events, and emotions of all living beings from past, present, and future. At first, I thought that this gate of truth was actually connected to you and held all your knowledge. When an alchemist gets access to it, they are granted some of your knowledge. But then a thought came to my mind after entering the gate. What if the Akashic records is real, and you were granted access or authority to all the alchemy knowledge from it? Edward stopped talking, waiting to hear an answer from Truth. A few seconds later, the latter said, you know, being too intelligent can be a problem, especially when you are this weak. Immediately after that, Edward was sent away from Truth, returning to the material world. Meanwhile, Truth had a pensive look on their face as he muttered, Merlin actually sponsored this guy? Interesting. Meanwhile, after Edward returned to his laboratory, he started laughing out loud like a madman. Luckily for him, the round was sound isolated. FEWNUE.co. The Akashic records are real. Endless knowledge. Since truth can get access to it, so can I. More importantly, I already have an idea how. Edward's mind rapidly moved as he concocted a crazy plan to find the Akashic record. For me to be successful, the main thing I need is to understand the countrywide transmutation circle that father used to become a god. In that case, I need to learn and observe the process myself. After making a preliminary plan, Edward finally regained his bearing. He first checked the Ishvalan that he transmuted. He saw that the body was wiggling on the floor, and quickly learned that the reason for that was that soul energy entered his body, making it activate. It was similar to the immortal soldiers or homunculi that the upper level of the Amestris military was secretly created with the Philosopher's Stone. Unlike the 7 deadly sins homunculi, these ones had no intelligence and acted purely on instinct. Of course, the one Edward created actually looked like a human instead of the white humanoid monsters. However, since this one only had a little amount of soul energy inside of it, it would not last long and is not immortal like the others. So, after killing it, he buried the body and proceeded with his next plan. Chapter 133, Gate of Truth. Edward sat in his alchemy laboratory while thinking about his meeting with Truth. He then looked at Morgana and asked, "You're more sensitive than I am, so what did you sense during our conversation?" The little elf placed her hand on her chin, making a thinking posture. "Although I did not dare skin him, I did feel something familiar, authority. And it was way more powerful than Herpo." "Oh, which one?" "A lot of them, and maybe all of them." Edward had a frown on his face after hearing this, then he said, "This should make sense since he might truly be an omnipotent being, especially since authorities are the fundamental rules or concepts that govern a world. By controlling them, truth can probably warp or bend reality to its whim. However, the real question is whether this power is only in this universe or in all universes. Unfortunately, we do not have a way to answer this question," replied Morgana. "At least for now." "True. In that case, let's get back to business." Edward closed his eyes. Soon after that, he found himself in a white room with nothing in sight. In front of him was his Gate of Truth. "I was right, the Gate of Truth resides in a person's soul space or dimension." "That's indeed an extraordinary discovery," said Morgana, who appeared in the soul space as well. "More importantly, it seems that I have my own Gate of Truth." The two of them turned around and saw another gate behind them. The gate's design was different from Edward's as it had many brains drawn on it, along with something that looked like a supercomputer. "Since my soul is connected to yours, it's normal for your gate to be in the same space as mine, just like the Elric brothers were connected to another after attempting human transfiguration." Morgana nodded her head, but she was strangely focusing on the gate. "Is there something wrong? I can feel the connection of my main server through the Gate of Truth." Edward was slightly surprised after hearing this, then he said, "Well, technically speaking, the current server and the main one share the same soul. So, this should explain the connection. Is there any benefit to the connection?" "Yes. I can now use 30% of my calculation powers instead of the previous 10%. Additionally, I can use the connection as a space coordinate to return home FRE.M. That's excellent news. Alright, let's begin our next experiment." Both of them then left the soul space and Edward returned to his body. He then entered his world gate, headed straight for one of his laboratories. He took 4 people, 1 wizard, 1 muggle, 1 wizard clone, and 1 muggle clone. He placed his hand on the wizard's head and entered his soul space. This time, however, he did not see a white room. Instead, he saw a world where the captured wizard was having fun torturing a group of women. Without caring about what was happening around him, Edward began to search the small dimension of this person's soul to find a Gate of Truth. Unfortunately, even after searching everywhere, he could not find anything. Could it be that only the people in this world have a Gate of Truth? I thought that all living beings with a soul had one. Edward paused for a moment as he contemplated, then he muttered, "Maybe I'm going about this the wrong way." Immediately, he connected to his Gate of Truth. Then, he connected his soul space with this one. As soon as Edward's Gate of Truth appeared in this wizard's soul space, a strange vibration came from it, traveling throughout the entire dimension. Then, the image of torture vanished before the room turned all white. The wizard found himself standing in front of Edward.fl.c. "Your Majesty," he screamed as he walked backward without looking back. However, he soon found himself touching something. With confusion, the wizard turned around and saw a black gate slightly floating in the air that had a strange design on it. "What is this?" Nevertheless, Edward ignored him as he looked at the gate with a smile on his face. So, it is true. Every living being with a soul could have a Gate of Truth of their own. After making this discovery, Edward left this wizard's soul space to check the others' people. And they all had a Gate of Truth. The clone's gate seemed weird as there is no design on the gate. Moreover, something just feels off about it. Well, I can study that later. After discovering that everybody has a Gate of Truth just like all the citizens of this universe, he was satisfied since the Empire will be able to use this world's form of alchemy that he labeled Gate Alchemy. Of course, just because someone has a gate does not mean that they can become an alchemist. After all, Gate Alchemy is a form of science that requires scientific knowledge as a basis. Additionally, each alchemist has different talents that manifest in the form of their ability to sense energy and properly control it. No matter what world, the concept of all men being equal is still the biggest lie. Talent is often the divide between extraordinariness and mediocrity. After making sure that his empire will be able to use gate alchemy to further increase their strength and foundation, Edward prepared to review the gain he acquired after surviving human transmutation. So, he entered his alchemy room, placed his hands together like he was praying, then transmuted a spear from the ground. Well, there is no need for a transmutation circle. But I can go even further. Electric lights came under his feet, then the ground turned into a giant fist that punched the wall. Well, I can even use my feet instead of my hand, quite convenient. All this time, he was not using magic, but alchemy. Edward then snapped his finger, and a raging flame appeared before hitting the wall again. Well, I have to say, Colonel Mustang's flame alchemy is truly overpowered in this world. Maybe I should develop alchemy unique to me. Maybe I could get a title like the Electricity Alchemist? No, the Lightning Alchemists. That's a cool name. Master, your narcissism is showing again, said Morgana, who suddenly appeared on his shoulder. Just let me be. What's next on the schedule? You have to study this world's Philosopher's Stone, the Chimera, Mechanical Repair, Shing's Alkahestry, and the Homunculi. Edward nodded, then he said, let's study the stone first, then go meet some people and establish a plausible and trustworthy identity in this world. As you wish. Chapter 134, Philosopher's Stone. After dealing with the issue of the Gate of Truth, Edward began to study this world's Philosopher's Stone. He had read the mind of its creator, Dr. Mako, and also sneaked inside the fifth laboratory in Central and secretly stole all the research inside. In fact, he stole all the research in all the different laboratories. So, Edward drew the transmutation circle needed to create the stone in his laboratory. Since I cannot kill anyone in this world, I'll have to improvise. Morgana, get me 1,000 clones. Yes, master. Soon the space fluctuated, then 1,000 people dressed in white clothes appeared in the room, lying down on the floor as if passed out. Edward had used an extension charm on the room, so it could hold all these people. After placing the clones in the center of the circle, he activated the circle. Soon after that, the clones disintegrated into small particles, leaving a dark red stone in the middle of the transmutation circle. Edward took the stone and began to analyze it. A few minutes later, he sighed, "This thing is quite disappointing." "Indeed," replied Morgana. "This is just a combination of life energy and countless souls together. Additionally, the souls still have some level of consciousness, making it very easy to influence the user." Edward nodded his head. The Philosopher's Stone is considered one of the real immortal substances, meaning that without outside influence, it would never be destroyed. As for this one, after a certain amount of use, it will destroy itself. NL.C. Meanwhile, the one in our world can self-generate mana on its own after the energy inside has been used. Well, at least, the greater stone does. After analyzing further for a while, Edward said, "Let's do a few more experiments." He then proceeded to create 2 more stones using gate alchemy, one from Muggle prisoners, and one from wizard prisoners. Finally, he compared the final products. As expected, the one made from wizards is more powerful since their souls and life energy are naturally more powerful. Followed by the Muggle-made one, then the clones. However, the resentment from these wizards' souls is at least 5 times more prominent from the Muggle one, and 10 times more from the clones, commented Morgana. "Yes, but I did not expect to have an unexpected discovery," said Edward as he focused on the stone made from wizards. This one was not just dark red but had a hue of blue deep in the middle. "This stone contained mana inside," pointed out Edward. "How fascinating. This is like a perfect combination of soul energy, mana, and life force. Yes, according to my calculation, by studying this stone, we should be able to create a stone made of these 3 energies and increase the power of the greater stone by approximately 254%. And that's just the lowest estimate. In that case, begin the calculation to find the perfect ratio of these 3 energies to making a real Philosopher's Stone." "As you wish. How long will the calculation take?" 3 days. "That long," said Edward. "Well, given that you're not at full capability, it's understandable. Alright, I guess it's time to move a little bit." Scene break. Edward was in the southern region, in a small town named Dublith. In front of him was a small shop with the words "meat" printed in large words. Without hesitation, he entered the shop. Immediately, he was greeted by a slightly muscular man with black hair. "Hello, sir, how can I help you?" asked Mason, the shop assistant. "Am I in the wrong place?" said Edward with a confused look on his face. "I was told that a couple was the owner of this shop." "You are correct, as I'm just here as an assistant. Since you want to see the owner, I'll get them." "I appreciate it," said Edward with a smile. A few seconds later, Izumi and her husband Sig walked out from the back of the shop. She looked up and down at Edward before saying, "I don't think I've ever met you in my life, so who are you? And why are you looking for us?" "My name is Edward Bones, and I'm looking for the alchemist known as Izumi Curtis." "I'm guessing that's you." "I'm just a simple, kind housewife," replied Izumi. Plus, you have not answered my question, why are you looking for me? I am also an alchemist, and I've traveled the world on a journey to exchange knowledge with different alchemists. However, so far, I've been very disappointed by the alchemists of Amestris, as they are a bunch of military madmen that only use alchemy, but do not study or truly understand it. So far, there are only 4 alchemists that I think could truly have an exchange with me, and you're one of them. Izumi squinted her eyes at Edward, then said, very confident, I see. Alright, let's see if you're as skilled as you are handsome. She invited him to her house, then for the next 2 hours, the two of them had an intense conversation about alchemy. They talk about history, theories, runes and symbols, and the practical aspect of alchemy. Izumi was quite surprised by how deep Edward's knowledge was, considering that he looked like a young man in his 20s. Meanwhile, after gaining a certain level of trust with Izumi, Edward proceeded to his next step. He took a piece of chalk to draw a very complicated transmutation circle in the table that they were discussing on. As for Izumi, she was on alert, as the transmutation circle had some resemblance to human transmutation. However, it was also completely different. What is this? She asked with a frown on her face. You can consider it the law of equivalent exchange for knowledge. Please, said Edward as he motioned her to place her hand on one of the spots of the circle. Izumi hesitated for a moment, then curiosity got the best of her. Plus, she was quite confident in her skill. To her, Edward looked like a weak son of a wealthy family obsessed with alchemy. As soon as she placed her hand on the circle, a light flashed in the center, then, to her horror, an eye appeared. Izumi had seen that eye when she performed human transmutation. Since then, it has been her nightmare. Before she could react, she found herself in a white space with the gate of truth in front of her. Turning her head, she saw Edward was also there with another gate behind him. You don't need to panic. As I said, this is just an exchange of knowledge. Soon after he said this, both the gates opened and some black tentacles that looked like arms appeared from them. Unlike when these two performed human transmutation, these tentacles did not swallow them inside the gate but connected. Immediately afterward, Izumi felt countless knowledge regarding alchemy being implanted in her head. No, to be exact, her knowledge was being exchanged for one of equal value. The process only lasted a few minutes, then she found herself back in her house, sitting at the same table. So, human transmutation was impossible in the first place. And my formula was not even close to being enough, muttered Izumi. She then looked at Edward and said, thank you. You have greatly helped me. Edward nodded his head to receive her thanks. He knew that the reason she thanked him was that she learned that when she tried to transmute her child, what she summoned was not even him. As such, her child did not have to suffer twice. This exchange was quite beneficial to me as well, said Edward with a smile. However, Izumi just sighed as she knew that he was just being polite. During the exchange, she could feel that her knowledge was a drop in a vast ocean compared to his. As such, she was wondering how a person could have such large alchemical knowledge. By the way, are you interested in being my wife? Suddenly asked Edward. A question that truly shocked Izumi, especially on how random it was. Then she laughed out loud. Although you're a handsome guy, I'm already married. Plus, you're not my type at all, you have no muscles whatsoever. Ignoring the killing glare that Sig was giving him, Edward smiled before saying, that's a shame. However, I'll have you know, I could easily defeat your husband in a contest of pure strength. Sig, who felt that he was both insulted and challenged, flexed his muscles, then placed his hand on the table, challenging Edward to an arm wrestle competition. He was prepared to show the skinny young man who dared to try to take his wife from him. Still, with a smile on his face, Edward also placed his hand on the table, competing with him. Sig immediately used all his strength to defeat his opponent and show up to his wife. Unfortunately, it was useless. Edward's hand did not budge a tiny bit. Then, a tremendous strength came from Edward's hand and Sig's hand was slammed on the table. A look of confusion appeared on his face as he wondered what happened. Even his wife was surprised as she knew how strong her husband was. As Izumi noticed Edward looking at her with a smirk on his face, she said, still not interested. It's a shame, replied Edward, although his face did not show it. Well, it's time for me to leave. Before I go, I will leave you with one last gift. Edward then took out a tube from his coat that had a blue liquid inside. This is a potion that can cure your organs problem. Although it cannot allow you to have children again, it can solve your health problems. If you trust me, you can drink it. After leaving it on the table, he left. Chapter 135, Tragedy? Not on my watch. After exiting the meat shop, Edward smiled in satisfaction as his plan was going smoothly. The reason that he went to meet Izumi Curtis was for 2 reasons. 1. When he was stealing knowledge from alchemists' minds, he did not do so for her and the protagonists of this world, the Elric brothers. The reason for that was that these people had opened the gate Truth, so he was worried that his actions would alert Truth. So, he decided to be careful. So, his meeting with Izumi was a way to exchange knowledge. The second reason was that he needed a reasonable and upright identity when he interacted with the Elric brothers and the people around them. While walking away, Edwards thought to himself. This Sig was quite strong, even beyond the limit of ordinary humans. Now that I think about it, certain individuals of this world like Izumi, Sig, Riza Hawkeye, Scar have abnormal physiques compared to ordinary humans. Plus, they did not achieve this level of strength through genetic engineering, but through pure training. Just now, Edward just checked both Sig and Izumi's life code and determined that they were ordinary people. This should have something to do with Qi. In this world, according to the eastern country of Xing, Qi is the life energy flowing through all things, from mountains to rivers, to flowers, and even humans. They called this flow the dragon pulse. The people of Xing use this life energy in their alchemy instead of earthen energy, thus making their alchemy more suitable for medical purposes. If the people of this world can passively absorb life energy from the dragon pulse while training to increase their Qi or life force, then their strength, speed, and endurance would increase beyond the normal level. From what I remember, Ling Yao and Mei Chong could sense Qi inside a person's body and even use it to track and identify enemies. As a result of this, they could also sense the countless souls inside the homunculi. Well, it seems that I have to visit Xing during my time in this world. After returning home, Edward again began to study alchemy. This time, he was focused on chimera. In just a few days, he managed to create a regular chimera by combining different animals. Then he went a step further, taking out the basic chemical compounds of these animals to create the chimera from nothing. Following this, he studied human chimera. A holographic image of DNA was displayed in front of Edward and Morgana. The DNA of these human chimera has been completely rewritten to include animal DNA. In some way, this could be considered a form of human evolution, said Edward. Yes. The effect is similar to Tower Masters Narcissa and Soleil's experiment of placing magical animal souls in a human body. Except the human chimera can transform into half human, half animal, while the ones in their experiment only acquire certain characteristics or abilities of animals while still retaining their human form, said Morgana. Strictly speaking, their experiment is way better. Nevertheless, studying these human chimera should greatly increase the genetic technology of the Empire. The little elf quickly did some calculation, then said, with enough chemical materials, we could basically mass-produce these human chimera. However, the ones made strictly from chemicals instead of combining an animal with a human do not have a soul, they're just an empty vessel. We do not need a soul to control them, replied Edward. We could plant chips inside their brain, then have you control them. With your computing ability, it's easy to control a few quadrillions. Essentially, this technology will allow the Empire to have a massive army of cannon fodder. Master, do not forget to take into account the resources needed for such a thing. I know this, I'm just stating a possibility. Edward then continued to review the data he gathered, then, he seemed to think of something. Morgana, what date is it? September 4, 1914. After saying this, Morgana paused as if she just remembered something, then a look of horror and confusion appeared on her face. Didn't I ask you to warn me a few days before this date arrived? Master, I seem to have forgotten. Both of them became silent after hearing this. As an AI and a supercomputer, there is no way that she could forget something like a regular person. Even Edward with his perfect memory can be distracted and forget things, hence the reason he had Morgana. However, she should not be able to forget unless someone interfered and hacked her program. However, Morgan is both a technological invention and a magical way, making it virtually impossible for ordinary means to do so. And given the low technological tree of this world, this was even more impossible. Immediately, both of them thought of a person capable of doing this. They looked at each other but did not say anything. Edward left his house and headed somewhere. Scene break. Edward Elric and his brother, Alphonse, were standing in a dark room looking at a dog. Sadness, despair, and confusion could be seen on their faces or surrounding them. Sho Tucker lay on the floor with blood flowing on his face, laughing hysterically. Lieutenant Riza Hawkeye held a gun pointed at him. Meanwhile, Colonel Mustang was also looking at the dog. Although he had a calm look on his face, his clenched hands showed his true mood. Suddenly, a voice ringed into the room. Am I too late? All of them turned around looking at the sudden intruder. Riza pointed her gun at the handsome man that just appeared in the room. Mustang and the Elric brothers were on guard, preparing to perform alchemy at any moment's notice. Edward, who just operated in the room, ignored these people as he looked at the dog. He remembered how terrible he felt when he first watched the anime and witnessed Nina Tucker. Immediately after knowing that he came to this world, he decided to save this little girl, along with Mise Hughes. Edward raised his head to look at the symbol of Alphonse's left shoulder. The flannel symbol? Are you guys related to Izumi Curtis? She had the same symbol tattooed on her body. You know our teacher, asked Alphonse. So, you're her student. I met her and had a pleasant exchange. She's quite the extraordinary alchemist. Unfortunately, she declined my invitation to be my wife. The Elric brothers immediately thought this strange man was insane. Knowing how crazy and powerful their teacher is, they wondered how he managed to survive after asking such a question. Who are you? And how did you get past the soldiers outside? Asked Riza. She was not as gullible as these children and was on alert. How did I get here? I just appeared here, of course. Then, Edward started walking towards the dog. Taking his action as a threat, Riza immediately shot her gun. However, once the bullet reached a meter from Edward, they evaporated on sight. "What's going on?" asked the lieutenant. "Decomposition," said Edward Elric. The bullet was decomposed into its basic element. "Brother, he did not even use a transmutation circle, do you think? WN.OM. Maybe." Edward ignored those people and came close to Nina to examine her. With a frown on his face, he said, "A shoddy method of making a human chimera." The human body was mostly decomposed to make a bunch of messed up and unnecessary organs inside the animal body. The most terrible thing is that the animal soul was mixed with the human soul. Although the situation is grave, it's not irreversible. He then took a piece of chalk to draw a circle on the ground, followed by a bunch of complex runes. Meanwhile, the Elric brothers who were quietly observing the transmutation circle quickly understood something. Edward Elric then yelled, "Are you crazy, performing human transmutation? Boy, stay out of things that you do not understand," said Edward Bones as he glared at him, making the older Elric brother frightened. Those eyes were truly scary. In one spot of the circle, he then placed 35 liters of water, 20 kilograms of carbon, 4 liters of ammonia, 1.5 kilograms of lime, 800 g of phosphorus, 250 g of salt, and a bunch of other materials. After doing this, he placed his hand on the circle to activate. Then, a miracle happened in front of everybody present. The chimera dog decomposed before separating into two, one girl and one dog. The little girl was Nina Tucker. "How is that possible?" screamed Sho Tucker. Not long after he said those words, the little girl opened her eyes. She looked around in confusion. After seeing Edward Elric, she muttered, "Big brother Edward?" She then looked at her father. A look of fear appeared on her face as he looked on the floor, not wanting to look at him. Meanwhile, our protagonist nodded in satisfaction after seeing this. Although separating the soul was a little trouble, everything turned out fine in the end. You just successfully performed human transmutation," said Edward Elric, with both shock and happiness. Chapter 136 Introduction. "Full Metal, you need to calm down," said Mustang, which was his first words ever since Edward showed up. "Calm down? How can I calm down?" yelled Edward Elric. "This man just recreated a perfect human body through human transmutation. No, to be precise, he recreated Nina's body matter by matter. Not to mention how perfectly he separated her soul." "So," responded Mustang. "That means that his method could help get our bodies back," added Alphonse. "Can you guys quiet down?" said Edward Bones. Then, he looked at Nina and asked, "How do you feel?" "Big brother, I'm fine. Does it hurt anywhere?" "No." Although she said she was fine, Edward could tell that she was not, at least psychologically. Well, it was understandable as she was just fused with a dog by her father. So, he secretly used a mind-soothing spell to reduce the impact that this event would have on her. Once he was done, he used a sleeping spell on her so that she could rest. Finally, he stood up, looked at the Elric brothers, and said, "Unfortunately, you're wrong, RWL.OM. "What do you mean?" hurriedly asked Alphonse. "Well, your body was used as a toll for opening the gate of truth. Logically speaking, it should have been gone, returning to the flow of the universe. Since the law of equivalent exchange is absolute, you can't recreate your body." "Are you saying that it's impossible to get our bodies back?" asked Edward Elric with gritted teeth. "I'm not saying that. However, the method I just used will not succeed for you guys." Meanwhile, Lieutenant Hawkeye, who still had her guns raised, suddenly said, "Have any of you noticed how easy this man was able to gain our trust and lead the conversation, and yet, we do not even know his name. On top of that, he seemed to know a lot about the conditions of U2 WVL.co. Everyone then noticed that she was right, so they once again became on guard. As for Edward, he just smiled before saying, "My name is Edward Bones, a traveler from distant lands. I'm currently in the process of traveling the world to learn about different countries' alchemy. My first step is a mistress. Soon, I'll be heading to Xing. Do you have a passport and a visa?" asked Colonel Mustang. "Of course," responded Edward as he took it out. The lieutenant slowly walked to him to check it. "He's from Krita, the passport and visa are real," commented Lieutenant Hawkeye. She then looked at Edward and asked, "Last question, how did you suddenly appear here? And how did you know that something bad would happen?" She remembered how this person asked if he was too late after appearing here. This was one of the reasons she was suspicious. "I cannot explain how I knew that something would happen here, I just knew. Think of it as intuition. As for how I suddenly appear, well, I just teleported here." "That's preposterous," said Edward Elric. "Alchemy is based on scientific principles, meanwhile, teleportation is nothing but science fiction. It's impossible to use alchemy to teleport." "No, it's possible. All you have to do is decompose the body into atoms, then reconstruct it in another place. Of course, you would need some other dimension as a link to connect the two places. Like the Gate of Truth," muttered the older Elric brother. "Exactly," responded Edward Bones. "Even so, if even a single atom was missing, the process would fail. Controlling trillions upon trillions of molecules seemed an impossible task." "You are thinking about this too deeply," added Edward. Alchemy is not 100% based on science. At a deeper level, it overlaps with spiritualism, the occult, and pseudoscience. For example, the soul is linked to the body through the mind. In the process of teleportation, once the soul passes through the gate and arrives at the desired destination, using the mind, all the atoms in the body will follow. And when it comes to the process of reconstruction, if we consider the atoms in the body as living entities with instinct, an alchemist just has to allow these atoms to follow this instinct and the body will reconstruct itself on its own. There is no need to rebuild it atom by atom. Edward was not just spewing nonsense. In the anime, Edward Elric did achieve something similar to teleportation when he was swallowed by the homunculi, gluttony. And the process he used was similar to the one that Edward mentioned. The Elric brothers seemed to be enlightened after hearing his words, so they stopped to ponder Edward's words. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Hawkeye was thinking to herself. This way this man behaved, he seemed like he was a teacher. More importantly, he seemed to enjoy teaching. Wait, suddenly said Alphonse. There is still the issue of toll. To open the gate, a toll must be paid. So, what did you pay? Good question. Unfortunately, I cannot answer that question. Edward Elric frowned after hearing this, then he said, by chance. If you want to ask me if I have a philosopher's stone, the answer is no. However, I can warn you guys. Your search for this stone will bring you a lot of pain and misery. After saying that, Edward paused for a moment, looked at the lieutenant. Could you please stop pointing a gun at me? It is very uncomfortable and useless. Quite frankly, if I wanted to do something to any of you, there is nothing you could do about it. Oh, how so? Asked Colonel Mustang with a smirk on his face, obviously displeased by the insinuation. Like this, said Edward, who proceeded to snap his finger. Then, flame surrounded him, then he snapped his finger again, controlling the atoms and electrons in the surrounding area. Then, a massive surge of electricity surrounded him. Flame alchemy, said Colonel Mustang. How is that possible? Muttered Lieutenant Hawkeye. Her father was the creator of flame alchemy, and she only passed it on to one person. I can be considered one of the greatest alchemists in modern time, boasted Edward. So, it was quite easy to recreate it after seeing the basic principle. He paused for a moment, turned to look at the sleeping Nina, and thought to himself, "'Tis good that I was able to save you." He then finally looked at Sho Tucker, who was trembling on the floor. Ever since Edward entered the room, he felt a horrendous dread overcoming his soul. This was the reason that he did not say anything. After taking a quick glance at this guy, he raised his head and said, "Well, now that I've accomplished the task I came here for and fed my vanity in the process, my job here is done. It was nice meeting all of you, folks." He then clapped his hand together, a transmutation light flashed from his body and he disappeared. This was not magic, he just bent the light surrounding him to appear invisible. While everyone was still shocked by what just happened, Edward did not immediately leave the compound. Instead, he waited for the night. He waited until Scar found Sho Tucker and killed him. Edward did not know whether his action would prevent that guy's death, so he waited to see. Since he could not do anything himself, he was prepared to use magic to influence Scar to do his bidding for him. Luckily, he did not have to do anything as the Ishvalan Avenger did not have any mercy for an alchemist like Sho Tucker. Of course, another reason he waited for Scar was to see the transmutation array tattooed on his body, and use legilimency to acquire information about where he placed his brother's research on combining alchemy and alchemy. After getting the information he wanted, he left. Chapter 137 Homunculi. Underneath Central, Führer Bradley stood along with all the other homunculi, waiting respectively while looking at his father. "You're saying that there is an alchemist that performed a perfect human transmutation to separate a human chimera?" asked father with a calm look in his voice. "According to the report made by Mustang, it seems so." "Did that alchemist have a philosopher's stone?" asked Envy. "According to the report, no." "Then the report must be a lie. There is no way a human is powerful enough to accomplish such a task without a stone." All the other homunculi agreed with her, even father. He knew how difficult it is to perfectly create a human body, especially without a philosopher's stone. The body he currently has was made using some of the souls from the people of Xerxes. Since he could not achieve such a task on his own, he did not believe a mere human would be able to. Nevertheless, even with a stone, this alchemist is quite talented. And from the information summarized, he likely opened the gate, said Lust. So, he can be considered a sacrifice. Wrath, have you located him? Unfortunately, no. In the past few days, I've sent people to find him but there was no result. Since he said that he was traveling east, could he have already headed for Xing? Asked Pride. Not likely, responded Führer Bradley. I received a report yesterday that someone with his exact description was seen not long ago in Central. So, I'm guessing that he is here, but very good at hiding. Why is he hiding? Does he know something about us? Asked Pride. Unlikely. If I had to guess, I would say it was because of his identity as a citizen of Krita. Maybe, he does not like to draw attention to himself in a foreign land. None of that truly matters, said Lust. What matters is to find this alchemist as soon as possible and control him. It's quite easy to accomplish both, said Envy with a grin full of malice. Since this alchemist went his way to save Nina Tucker, all we have to do is kidnap her and lure him. Based on his reaction, we might even use her to control him. That's a good idea, said Lust. Then, all the homunculi looked at Father for him to make a final decision. In that case, Lust and Gluttony, you two go capture that small human. Scene break. East City. Lust was standing in front of a small house with Gluttony next to her. The latter had drools coming out of his mouth. This place should be where Mustang placed the little girl, Nina Tucker. How nice of him. Can I eat her? Asked Gluttony. You can eat the old lady taking care of the little girl, but you cannot eat her. Also, you cannot eat the alchemist as well. After saying that, Lust entered the house calmly. However, she soon felt that something was wrong. It was too quiet. Could it be that Nina and the caretaker were not home today? With the utmost confidence in herself and her power, Lust entered the small manor with Gluttony following. However, when they reached the living room, they saw a man with black hair and blue eyes waiting for them. A smirking smile that made Lust angry for some reason was plastered on his face. You must be Edward Bones, correct? Asked Lust. That's correct, Free.0. And what are you doing here? Waiting for you, of course, replied Edward. Lust frowned after hearing this. Are wondering how I knew you guys would be coming, continued Edward. Well, let's just say, you people are quite predictable. Let me guess, this was Envy's plan, wasn't it? A slight surprise flashed across her eyes. It seems that I was right. Well, her personality is truly twisted, so only he would have no problem using a little girl for her plan. You seem to know us pretty well, commented Lust. More than you can imagine. Then, Edward ignored her as he focused on the idiot known as Gluttony. His eyes contained endless greed. Inside this idiot was an entire dimension that lies between reality and the soul space where the gate of truth exists. Gluttony is the result of a failed experiment by Father trying to recreate the gate of truth so that he can gain all the alchemy knowledge in existence. However, after failing, he only used Gluttony as a disposable expert, an act which Edward considered truly wasteful. By studying Gluttony, Edward believed that he would be able to create an entire large dimension by himself, as right now, he could only use magic to create a small one the size of a bucket. After creating that large dimension, all he has to do is connect it to his soul space, place countless mana inside the dimension, then use that mana to cast magic and remove his limitation on his body. Of course, Edward knew that there were a few problems with his plan. For example, he still does not know how to use energy from different dimensions to cast spells. Maybe, he will have to wait one day when he goes to the Marvel world. Nevertheless, the first step of being able to create his own dimension will start by studying the homunculi, Gluttony. While Edward was staring at Gluttony, Lust immediately took action and attacked. Her fingernails grew longer and rushed towards him, trying to piece his arms and legs. She was probably trying to immobilize him. However, a weird blue shield appeared to surround Edward, protecting him. This was a force field that he created by using alchemy to control electromagnetic fields in the surrounding. Ever since he came to this world, he tried his best not to use magic to the best of his ability. After being attacked, Edward turned his head and looked at Lust. Although you're not as important as him, you still have value. After dissecting you, I should find a way to turn the Philosopher's Stone into my magic core. Lust was confused by the words magic core. However, she did not have time to respond. Edward snapped his finger, then both Lust and Gluttony fell to the ground and started seizing. Immediately after that, they found themselves unable to move. What did you do to us? With a smile on his face, Edward said, did you know that certain sound frequencies can affect the human brain and make it shut down the entire body? If it was a normal person, they would have passed out long ago. However, you, homunculi, are more resistant, so you can keep some form of consciousness. Alright, let's get down to business. Edward then walked to both Lust and Gluttony to take a few samples of blood. Then, he turned on the light in the dark house, displaying a strange transmutation circle that was already drawn. He placed the blood in the middle of the circle before activating it. Then, to Lust's horror, two bodies that looked exactly like her and Gluttony appeared inside the room. Meanwhile, Edward nodded in satisfaction after seeing this. He then took out 2 stones from his pocket, 2 Philosopher's Stone to be exact. He placed the stones inside their bodies. Morgana, can you take control of these bodies? As you wish, master, replied the little purple hair elf that suddenly appeared. Then she said, I have already scanned these people's memories and developed a behavior model based on their personality and ideologies. However, there are a few problems. What is it? Although I can replicate the woman's ability, I cannot do the same for the fat one. Well, it does not matter, their replacement is only temporary. So, just try not to use his ability until I'm finished. As you wish. After that, Edward took the real Lust and Envy to go back to his laboratory, while the fake one returned to see Father. Chapter 138, The Key Ingredient. Envy slowly walked inside the tunnel that led to the place his father was. He was in a happy mood as he just finished burning down the central library, preventing the Elric brothers from getting any information regarding the Philosopher's Stone. However, as soon as he entered the room, he saw that everyone was looking at Lust and Gluttony with a somewhat somber tone. Lust? Did you already get back? Where is the little human girl, or the strange alchemist? Asked Envy. I did not capture any of them. The entire situation was a trap. What do you mean? The alchemist seemed to know about our existence and was waiting for us. Gluttony and I were lucky to escape after dying more than 100 times. He's that powerful? More than you can imagine. How strong can a human be? Said Pride with a sneer. You're just trying to use excuses for your failure. Brother Pride, you are more than welcome to go after him yourself, said Lust nonchalantly. Tell me his location and I will gladly do so. There is no need to bicker, children, said Father. The current issue we are facing now is whether this alchemist knows about our plan. Will he stop it? Finally, how did he know about it? Only a few people in this room know about the entire plan, and Father did not believe that his children would betray him. There might be some leaks from the military, said Pride, then he looked at Bradley. Wrath, you might want to check your subordinates. Although some military commanders knew about our existence, they did not know our complete plan. So, if this alchemist manages to gather some information from them, then we will still have some advantages, replied Führer Bradley. Father, there is still the possibility of greed betraying us and revealing our plans, said Lust. Indeed, that's a possibility, replied Father. Envy, I need you to go check on him. As for you Lust and Gluttony, go deal with Scar, he's been causing too much trouble in Central lately. Meanwhile, inside his laboratory, Edward had gloves on. In front of him, 3 bodies had their bodies opened from the middle, displaying their organs. These 3 bodies were the 3 homunculi, Lust, Gluttony, and Greed. The odd thing was that these guys were still alive, witnessing this process. However, they were unable to move. Edward looked at the red stone that served as their cores with a calm look on his face. Interesting. The Philosopher's Stone has completely replaced their essence. All the bones, muscles, and organs are nothing but decorations. They are the stone, and the stone is them. As long as the stone remains intact, they will live. Even if all their body parts were destroyed, it can be reconstructed if the stone is intact. However, if something happens to the stone, they will die. Edward paused for a moment, then he said, Morgana, are you done searching for their memories? Yes, Master. The process took longer than needed as there were too many souls inside the stone, so I had to go through all their memories before finding the main one. Is that so? Then send me the important information and your analysis. Yes, sir. Edward then began to analyze the process of these people turning into homunculi. Essentially, a philosopher's stone was liquefied and injected into the bloodstream of a human, along with one of the 7 deadly sins that served as a fusion material. Then, all the souls in the stone fought together to be the final one that got to fuse with the deadly sin of Father. Meanwhile, during the process, the energy of the stone will destroy and reconstruct the body. The intense pain is enough to make the majority of souls give up, but if one has a will strong enough, he or she will be the final victor, fused with Father's sin and become the main personality of the homunculi. After reviewing that information, Edward muttered, well, I was right to be cautious and not immediately fuse the Philosopher's Stone with my magic core. After studying alchemy for a while, he did come up with a feasible plan to fuse the stone with his magic core. However, he wanted to be safe, so he decided to wait and study homunculi first. And after seeing the result, he knew that his bet was correct. Soon after that, Edward continued to gather more data. Soon, both Lust and Greed will not have much help to him, so he wanted to get as much value from them as possible. As for the homunculi, they wanted to scream because of the pain, but their throats were blocked by something. All they wished for was that they had some anesthesia. Meanwhile, little Morgana looked at the process while thinking to herself, Master seems extremely cruel this time, I wonder why he hates these homunculi so much. Scene break. Ed and Elle sat with a bunch of books around them. It appeared that they have not moved out of this room for quite some time now. And their faces were one of horror and despair. They have just learned what the key ingredient for a philosopher's stone was, human lives. Ed clenched his hand in anger, then he remembered the warning that Edward gave him regarding the stone. He suddenly stood up. Brother? Al, do you remember the alchemist with the same name as us? You mean Edward Bones, E.Co. Yes, him. He is probably the most talented alchemist we've met. So, why is he so powerful? He could create a miracle like human transmutation, but he did not have to use a philosopher's stone. But, look at us, we could not even save a little girl. Without him, we would be powerless and watch Nina live a life worse than death. What are you saying, brother? I'm saying that if we can find the reason he's so powerful without a philosopher's stone, then maybe, we can use that method ourselves to get our bodies back. Al paused for a moment. That's indeed a good way, but how do we find him? For all we know, he could be heading to Xing already. I know where he lives, replied Ed. How come? The day after we met him, I found a card in my hotel room with his address on it. Brother, why didn't you tell me? I forgot. How can you be so irresponsible with something so important? We were so busy dealing with Scar at that time, so it slipped my mind. Plus, there was a note that said not to reveal his whereabouts. While arguing, the two Elric brothers departed to find Edward's house. Chapter 139 Human. Inside his house in Central, Edward sat in a chair next to the firehouse reading a book. After a few minutes, he finished the book, put it aside, and took the drink next to him to sip. How is it, master? Well, the automail is quite interesting. Although the Empire can regrow limbs, it's not much use in the medical field. However, for the study of cybernetic enhancement, it should be useful. In the Empire, there is a small group of people who study how to turn ordinary people into cyborgs by replacing some body parts with cybernetic enhancement, turning them into living weapons. Because of magic and genetic engineering, this field is not that popular. However, Edward has been funding these people so that they can create a biochip that can be implemented in a wizard's brain, thus granting the computing power of a supercomputer. Although he already has Morgana and she has been bound to his soul and does not need it, his family members along with other wizards in the Empire will benefit greatly from this technology. So, how is the progress of reverse engineering the dimension inside Gluttony? Asked Edward as he took another sip of his drink. The process should take a few more days, replied little Morgana with frustration on her face. There is no need to blame yourself. After all, you're not at full capacity, reassured Edward. Then, he became quiet as if he was in deep thought. Morgana, do you think I should contact my family? The little elf frowned after hearing this. She knew that her master could contact the people in the Empire through the Gate of Truth and Soul Space since he left a piece of his soul there. As long as one person in the Empire used a spell to enter his soul space through the little piece of soul he left there, they could contact one another. As for how to make them use the spell, Morgana just has to connect to her main server and send a message through Skynet since she is Skynet herself. Even if it's possible to send a few words, this method has a high probability of working. However, there is a major problem facing them, truth. That's an essentially omnipotent existence. Although they have currently theorized that this omnipotence comes from this world only, and as soon as he leaves this world, he should be weakened drastically. Nevertheless, this is just a theory, there is no proof or sufficient data to back up this theory. So, Morgana knew that her master was worried that if he sent a message to his family, Truth might intercept the message, and even use it to discover their world. Morgana knows very well how paranoid her master can be, she guessed that he might even be worrying about whether Truth has read his mind and knew everything that he was thinking. So, after thinking about it for a while, she said, Master, it may be useless, but I think it's best to be prudent. Edward then nodded his head, you're probably right, it seems that we have visitors. Meanwhile, Ed and Al who followed the address on the card entered the house with a weird look on their faces. After seeing Edward waiting for them, Ed immediately yelled out loud, what was that? Why is it that only Al and I can see your house? Why can't Lieutenant Hawkeye enter the house even after standing right in front of it? Edward looked at the brothers and said, boy, know how to behave when in someone else's home. Sorry, said both Al and Ed who immediately felt like they were facing their teacher and her cruel training. As for the answer to your question, that's because I place a little magic on my house so that uninvited guests do not interrupt my peaceful life. The reason you two could come in was because of the card I gave you. Magic? There is no such thing, replied Ed. Alchemy is based on scientific principles and the laws of physique that govern our world. You're too closed-minded. In some places in this world, an alchemist would be considered a god because of their abilities. Why is that? That's because of ignorance, replied Ed. Exactly. The same can apply to you right now. Because you have never heard of magic or seen it, you're ignorant of its working and intricacies. Ed frowned after hearing this, then Al asked, Sir, in that case, what is magic? Magic is not so different from alchemy. The biggest difference is the fact that alchemists use earthen energy from the movement of tectonic plates to control the laws of physics and achieve extraordinary things, but magic uses a different kind of energy called mana. Alright, there is no need to mention this, I doubt any of you will ever encounter mana in this world. Edward then invited them to sit down in the living room while serving tea. The Elric brothers, knowing that Edward did not want to mention the topic of mana again, did not ask any more questions. So, what brought you two to visit this old man? Asked Edward. Both Al and Ed were a little speechless as they looked at Edward, who looked like someone in his early 20s. Ed then chose to ignore this before asking, We are here to ask you a question. Oh, go ahead. We want to know why you're such a powerful alchemist. Why could you save Nina so easily and we could not do anything about it? What differentiate you and us? Ed stared at Edward, waiting for his answer. He did not think that the answer had anything to do with magic, since when Edward saved Nina, he only used alchemy. Edward paused for a brief moment as he was surprised by this question. Then, he answered, The answer to your question is quite simple, humanity. Humanity? What does this have to do with anything? Said Ed with gritted teeth. Brother, calm down and let him continue. Fine, said Ed as he stared at Edward. The latter smiled like an old man appreciating youth's vitality and exuberance. Then, his smile faded. I did not lie to you. The truth of the matter is that you two have slowly accepted the fact that you're human and have limitations. I guess that after failing in human transmutation, failing to save Nina, and discovering the key ingredient in making the Philosopher's Stone, you have realized the consequences when alchemists try to play God, loss of their humanity. So, you guys have slowly decided to keep that humanity, to keep your moral compass, you have accepted your limitation. But I'm different from you. In my path of pursuing knowledge, I have slowly let go of humanity and have done many horrible things. As a result or as a price, as equivalent exchange, I have acquired power beyond the limit of humans. This is the reason that I can save Nina and you cannot. In many ways, Edward and Father are the same kinds of people. The main difference is that Father refused to acknowledge his human origins and see it as a weakness. However, Edward never let go of human origin and saw it as an anchor to keep him from going over the edge. Sir, do you ever regret your choice? Asked Al. No, since when I made the choice, I perfectly knew what path I was taking. However, there are still times I regret being forced into situations when I have to do things I regret. After chatting with Edward for a while, the Elric brothers left his manor with a desolate look on their faces. Chapter 140, Failed Species. Al and Ed stood in front of Edward's house with a solemn look emanating from their bodies. Brother, what should we do? Should we? No, replied Ed, just like we promised not to use the stone to get our bodies back, we did not need to walk on Mr. Bones' path. I believe that we will find a way to get our bodies back, certainly. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Hawkeye, who had a puzzling look on her eyes after seeing the Elric brothers suddenly appear out of nowhere, rushed towards them. Are you guys alright? What just happened? How did you guys suddenly disappear out of nowhere? The two looked at each other, but they did not answer, they just left to do their things. Meanwhile, after the Elric brothers left, Edward had something else to do. He apparat to the house of the leader of Amestris, Führer Bradley. The latter was in his study reviewing some papers. Suddenly, he felt something and raised his head. After seeing the person in front of him, Bradley said with a calm look, Are you the alchemist called Edward Bones? That's me. So, what brings about this visit? Asked Bradley, still staying calm and composed. You know, of all the homunculi, I have to say I hate you and Pride the most. I hate your arrogant demeanor and your level of coldness and indifference. It's a shame I cannot kill you lots. Is your opinion supposed to affect me? As soon as Bradley finished saying these words, he rushed towards Edward with two swords in his hand. His speed far surpassed the limits of humans. He swung his sword intending to chop Edward's head clean. However, midway through, Bradley suddenly coughed, blood starting sipping from his mouth and nose. He looked down to see Edward right in front of him, in a punching position. What shocked Bradley the most was the fact that the force of this punch severely punctured one of his lungs. My ultimate, I could not keep up with his speed. How fast is he? Immediately afterward, Bradley tried to distance himself from his opponent, knowing that his opponent was faster than him. Unfortunately, he discovered that he could not move a muscle. What did you do to me? With a smile on his face, Edward said, Do you know that all creatures with flesh and blood have something called pressure points? If you hit all of them, they will be rendered immobile. The human body has 18 pressure points, and since homunculi have the same physiology as a human, you also have the same pressure point. He paused for a moment, turned his head to the corner, and said, I wonder if this fact is true for creatures like you whose flesh and blood are merely a container, Pride. I truly want to know the answer to this question. In the corner that Edward was looking at appeared a young child about 8 years old or more. However, unlike real or ordinary children, his face had an eerie smile. Do not place me on the same boat as humans, replied Selim Bradley, also known as the homunculus, Pride. I've heard about you, Edward Bones, and I have to say, for a human, you're quite special. I've taken some interest in you, especially your origin. While saying this, countless shadows appeared around him, some of them had mouths at the tip. Capturing you should be quite entertaining. Edward was momentarily surprised, then he laughed out loud, his laughter echoed throughout the room. Oddly though, no one outside the room came to check, or realize that an intruder successfully infiltrated the home of the most powerful man of this country. Why are you laughing? Asked Pride with a frown on his face. I cannot believe that you're so arrogant that you even fail to see who is the hunter and who is the prey in this situation, replied Edward as he shook his head. I have to say, as a species, you homunculi are quite the failure. Failure? A mere human calls us failure? Ha ha ha, this is the most ridiculous thing I've heard in my life. Really? Then, let's think about this logically. Homunculi are made by implanting philosopher's stones into a human's body. Philosopher's stones are made from human life. So, without humans, there is no stone. Without stone, there are no homunculi. Even if there was a philosopher's stone, without humans to place it inside, no homunculi can be born. In conclusion, your entire race is nothing but a parasitic race that can only exist and survive because of humans. Even your so-called father was created from a humble slave. So, am I correct to assume that you guys are failures? Said Edward with a smirk on his face. W.cm. Meanwhile, Pride had the word furious written all over his face. Even the immobile Wrath was angry. Well, you seemed not convinced, continued Edward. Let me tell you another interesting fact. Humans can make homunculi, but homunculi cannot make humans. With all these facts, I truly want to know why you people always look down on humans, thinking that we're inferior to homunculi. Is it because of our emotions? Your father seemed to think that emotion is a weakness, and all of you seem to have inherited that idea. However, similar logic could apply to you guys as well. With each of you having only one of humans' 7 deadly sins, doesn't that mean that all of you are incomplete? How pitiful. Shut up, roared Pride as his shadow spike rushed straight towards Edward's eyes. He hated the look that the latter gave him. Unfortunately, a force field appeared, blocking the attack. Maybe it's because we are weak, continued Edward as he ignored Pride's constant attacks. The human race is indeed inherently weak, however, we are a race of endless possibility. With our weakness and limitations, we can create wonders beyond anyone's imagination. C. Edward paused for a moment, looked at truly outraged Pride, then said, "Well, I guess it's time for my sermon to end. Alright, let's get back to business." He raised his hand to create an intense light that enveloped Pride. Immediately after that, the latter's shadows disappeared. Edward knew that one of Pride's weaknesses was the fact that he could control shadows, not create them. So, as long as there are no shadows around him, he is powerless. The intense light served that purpose. After rendering Pride powerless, Edward made a clenching motion, then the earth underneath Pride's feet moved to form a sphere that imprisoned him. The intense light disappeared, making Pride's environment that of total darkness, without any shadows. Under Edward's control, the earth dome slowly shrunk to the size of a marble before he placed it in his pocket. He was truly interested in Pride's ability to absorb the power of the people he swallowed. Then, he turned his head to look at Wrath. "Now, it's your turn." The first thing he did was to read the latter's memory. Wrath was a unique homunculus as he was made with a philosopher's stone that contained only one human stone. As such, he did not have his brothers' and sisters' immortality and healing factors. Without many souls to interfere, Edward was able to easily read his mind and memories. "Interesting," muttered Edward with a slight surprise on his face. Chapter 141 Mies Hughes. After reading Wrath's memories, Edward realized that he was wrong about something. In the anime, Wrath is one of the most powerful villains that the protagonists faced, and he was not even an alchemist. He relied purely on his physical abilities and peak swordsmanship, and even a powerful alchemist like Colonel Mustang was not his match. Edward always assumed that his physical prowess was due to the Philosopher's Stone, but he was wrong. Wrath's enhanced physical abilities came purely from training. He waved his hand and a dissecting table appeared in the room. He laid Wrath on it before opening him up like a cadaver at a medical school. After a brief analysis, Edward muttered, "Your muscles are 5 times denser than humans, and so are your bones. Your organs are shock-resistant, and your life force is incredible. On top of that, your neural receptors are at least 10 times faster than humans. And all of that was achieved through pure training. How incredible." After doing an initial analysis on Wrath, Edward had Morgana scan all of his body down to the atomic level, then he left leaving Wrath alone. He knew that a few hours later, the latter would be able to move on his own. After returning to his house, Edward took 2 swords and started training. With each swing, he would control certain muscles in his body to exert a certain amount of force. Each swing was exact. Then, Edward felt a strange energy from the ground entering his body, nourishing his body. To be exact, it was increasing his life force, thus also enhancing his body. I was right, the people of this world can passively absorb life energy from what the people of Xing call Dragon Pulse. The life energy will nourish them, thus enhancing their bodies beyond normal range. And it seems that Wrath has developed the optimal method of training. He then continued to use Wrath's memory of training to fully digest it. A few hours later, he stopped and muttered, "FEOL.cm. This world is different from Earth, so it should not be possible for the citizens of the Empire to passively absorb life force to increase their physical fitness. However, after studying the concept of Dragon Pulse from Xing, I should be able to create a method to actively do so. Unfortunately, there is a bigger problem at large, whether Earth has any life force to absorb. Only living things have a life force. As such, this entire world or planet is actually a living organism. It might even be a part of Truth's body. But, the same cannot be said for Earth." Edward paused for a moment as he suddenly remembered a theory made by a wizard from Hawaii. The theory stated that Earth was a living creature, and the ley line nodes that travel through it were its magic veins. This theory is similar to the concept of the Dragon Pulse. However, instead of chi traveling through the ground and connecting everything, it's magic instead. Edward went through his memory to review that wizard's theory. Many people disagreed with him, with the main argument being that if planet Earth was alive, it should have a consciousness. Without it, it cannot be classified as a living organism. As such, the Hawaiian wizard has been researching to discover the consciousness or will of the planet. "That wizard might have been right," muttered Edward. "After all, truth can be considered the consciousness of all living things, including this planet. If he can exist, why can't the planet's consciousness exist? Even the entire universe might have its own consciousness. Alright, I can research these things when I get back." After that, Edward placed his focus on the homunculi, Pride. He was interested in its ability to absorb other homunculi and gain their powers and abilities. Scene break. So, you're saying that this alchemist dissected you, left you alive, then proceeded to take pride away? Yes, father. Why would he do that? From the brief conversation we had, the alchemist seems to be unable to kill us for some reason. However, he is also interested in our abilities, replied Wrath calmly. However, his hands that were clenched showed his true emotions. What he did not say to his father was that this alchemist seems to want to humiliate the homunculi, showing that they are as weak as ants in front of him. Just like they despised humans, the alchemist despised them. Father frowned after hearing this, paused for a few minutes before saying, as long as he does not mess with our plans, we will leave him alone for now. However, afterward, I will deal with him. E.cm. Days passed and Edward finished studying the homunculi that he captured, he then released them. Since he wanted their plans to succeed and promised truth not to kill anyone, he did not bother with them after getting the information he wanted. Even gluttony was released after Edward learned how to make a large dimension from him. Meanwhile, father was once again surprised once he learned that the lust and gluttony that he has been interacting with the past few weeks was a fake one. After realizing that Edward was a much greater threat than anticipated, he gave up the idea of making him one of the sacrifices and ordered the homunculi to avoid confrontation with him. Central City, inside a booth, a man lay on the floor bleeding, a picture of his wife and daughter was next to him. Looking down on him was the homunculus, Envy. You humans don't make any sense to me. You throw away your lives for nothing. After saying that, he turned around to leave. However, what he did not notice was that as soon as he did that, the bleeding person who was Lieutenant Colonel Miles Hughes suddenly plunged into the ground, before another person that looked exactly like he appeared. As for Envy, after turning his head, he saw a man with blue eyes standing in front of him. The man was wearing a suit with a long trench coat that floated with the wind. You're Edward Bones, said Envy as he unconsciously took a small step back. That's correct. Now, do you want to go willing with me and be dissected, or do you want me to drag you there by force? You can take your time to make a choice, I don't have any plans for the rest of the night. Envy gritted his teeth after hearing this, he hated the eyes that this alchemist gave him. Because it was similar to when he toys with the lives of humans when he watched them squirm before dying in despair. Don't be cocky, human, said Envy as he revealed his true form, which was a giant green four-legged beast with countless souls on its body. So, you've chosen the hard way. Fine by me. Edward snapped his finger, massive blue lightning traveled from his hand to hit Envy. He screamed out loud after being electrocuted, with burns all over his massive body. Envy heard another snape, then flames enveloped him and burned his massive body. In just 2 attacks, he lost dozens of souls to regenerate himself. Afterward, for the next 30 seconds, only Edward's hand snapping and Envy's scream could be heard in the area of the booth. For a sadistic thing like Envy, his screams were nothing but music to Edward. After playing for a while, he used a spell to place Envy to sleep before capturing it and leaving. Chapter 142 Funeral. Where am I? Muttered Miles Hughes as he opened his eyes, looking at the room he was in. Wait, I thought I was dead. Fortunately, you are not, suddenly said a voice, which slightly startled Hughes. He turned around to look in the direction of the voice, however, all he saw was blurred. Your glasses are on the nightstand next to you, said the voice. As such, Hughes reached out to take them. He had to tap his hand for a few seconds before he reached .fo.c. Hughes then saw a young man with black hair and blue eyes looking at him. Are you the one who saved me? That's correct, replied Edward. You can get up if you want, you have made a complete recovery. Hughes immediately realized that his body was in perfect shape. He raised his shirt to see a few scars on his body in the shape of bullet holes. If it was not for them, he would have thought that the previous event was a dream. Thank you for saving me, and when I have time, I would like to show my gratitude. But, I have to go. There is no need to rush. You do not understand, this is a matter of life and death. I am perfectly aware of your discovery of the nationwide transmutation circle and the implication behind it, replied Edward. Nevertheless, it does not change the fact that you cannot leave. Immediately, Miles Hughes became on guard as he looked at Edward with a solemn look. However, the latter just smiled and said, There is no need to guard against me, if I was your enemy, there would be no point in saving you. Now, come watch your funeral. As Hughes watched this young man leave, he pondered for a moment before realizing that the latter was right. So, he got up from the bed, rushed after him while yelling, Wait, who are you? I don't even know your name. Plus, what do you mean by watching my funeral? As Hugs followed the young man, he found himself in a living room with 2 chairs that looked remarkably comfortable. However, his eyes were attracted to what lay in front of the chair, a large projection screen that showed a funeral. At the funeral, Hughes saw his best friend Mustang, the soldiers under his command, the Führer, and more importantly, his wife and daughter. What is this? To the outside world, you're a dead man. So, this is your funeral. Hughes looked at the screen. Then, something that broke his heart happened. His daughter looked at his wife and said, Mom, why are they burying Daddy? Alicia, he's gone. Daddy said that he has a lot of work to do. If they bury him, he cannot do his work. Stop them, Mommy, stop them, Daddy has a lot of work to do. As Hughes watched his wife embrace his daughter with tears flowing down her eyes, he clenched his hand. Edward, who feared that this guy would cause trouble, immediately said, "Think of it that way, you're not really dead, just cannot see them for now." Hughes had already figured out that this young man who saved him would not let him leave for some reason, so, with clenched teeth, he sat on the remaining chair while he stared at the screen. Meanwhile, while Edward was watching, he was also pondering about his mortality. To him, the reason that Hughes made his family suffer like that was that he was too weak to prevent his death. And the current him was also pitifully weak. So, one day, his family might have to bury him just like Hughes. As such, Edward warned himself to never get complacent in his progress and to also always be careful so that he does not have to put his family through this. Too many people are counting on him. After the funeral ended, Hughes looked at Edward and asked, "Why did you save me? And why are you preventing me from warning people about my discovery?" Muttered Edward. "How do I explain this? Well, think of it that way. Imagine that you're reading a good book and you have a favorite character. However, the author decided to kill that character to drive the story and make it emotionally impactful, to raise the stakes. As a reader, there is nothing you can do about this since this is not your story. However, imagine if some god gave you the chance to travel to the world of that book and granted you the ability to change the plot as you wish. What would you do?" "Of course, save my favorite character," replied Hughes. "Well, that's exactly why I saved you. Although I'm a little flattered that I would be your favorite character, this is not a book, and I'm not some character on a page. This is real life with real consequences." Edward looked him straight in the eyes and asked, "If you were a character in a book, how would you possibly know? How would you know if your fate was already written down from the moment you were born?" Suddenly, an existential dread overcame Hughes, but he quickly regained his thoughts. "Okay, let's not mention your reasons for saving me, but why do you prevent me from giving the information about the nationwide transmutation circle? Whoever is behind this, if they succeed, all the citizens of Amestris will be killed. Since I'm a reader of the book, of course, I already know the end of the events. As such, I also know that other people will also find this information out and prevent it from happening," replied Edward calmly. "Even more so, since you already know the outcome, you can easily prevent it and reduce the necessary struggle and sacrifices that could happen," rebutted Hughes. "Unless you do not want to intervene or you will benefit in some ways. See, you are finally using your talent as an intelligence officer." Hughes sighed but did not continue on this topic. "By the way, I still do not know your name." "Oh, sorry about that. My name is Edward Bones," said Edward as he extended his hand for a handshake. "You're the alchemist that saved Nina Tucker?" "That's me. Mustang told me about you. I'm glad that you were there to save that little girl from her miserable fate," replied Hughes as he shook Edward's hand. "Now that everything is settled down, I will give you two options, stay here or travel with me." Hughes fixed his glasses up as he pondered for a moment, then he responded, "I'll stay here." Edward looked at him up and down. "Okay, you do not need to play smart. Even if you stay here, you cannot escape as I placed a powerful spell on this villa. Every day, someone will come up to give you a menu and you can choose what you want to eat. Besides that, you'll still be imprisoned inside. Spell, Fe. You can think of it as a very advanced form of alchemy." Hughes sighed after hearing this. He then asked, "If I leave with you, where are we going?" "We will be crossing the desert heading for the country of Xing." Hughes pondered for a while before deciding to travel with Edward. Chapter 143 Xerxes. Edward and Hughes were walking in the hot desert for days, while the latter was on the verge of collapse. The former was perfectly fine, he seemed to be enjoying the process. Edward turned his head to look at the dying Hughes before handing him a bottle. "Drink this." "Is this water?" said Hughes as he took a mouthful without waiting for him to answer. Immediately after, he stopped as if in a trance, then he said, "Oh my god, I just tasted color. Delicious, isn't it? Which color was your favorite, RW.C? Green, no, blue. Maybe I prefer green more, let's just say both of them. Personally, I found green a little too bitter, but blue is quite delicious." "My favorite is red," replied Edward. However, Hughes suddenly took out a picture from his pocket and said, "I bet my lovely wife and daughter would love the same color as me. Do you want to see how lovely they are? You've already shown it to me 5 times in the last 3 hours. So what? I can tell that you're secretly jealous. It's not my fault that you do not have a lovely daughter and wife." Edward's lisp twitched a few times, then he said, "The only reason that I do not have a daughter more lovely than you is that I am currently focusing on my career right now. All I'm hearing are excuses." "That's it." Edward had enough of this guy's bragging. He took a picture out of nowhere and showed it to him. "Look, while you only have one lovely wife, I have 5 lovely and beautiful wives." Hugh's mouth was slightly opened as he saw the picture of Edward surrounded by 5 beautiful women that looked at him dotingly. He then said with gritted teeth, "You're just unfaithful." "Oh, is that jealousy I smell?" said Edward with a sneer. "What a disgusting smell." Hughes ignored him and refused to talk to him anymore, nor show any picture of his family. After all, what man did not secretly want to have many wives even if they knew that they could not handle it? After seeing Hughes deflated, Edward's mood became much better, so they continued their voyage. As for the former lieutenant colonel, he finally noticed that after drinking that potion, he was no longer fatigued or dehydrated during the journey. Besides needing to eat food, he was in perfect shape. However, since he decided to ignore that guy that made him mad, he decided not to ask. At least, not now. After a few days of traveling, the two reached a ruin, to be precise, a ruined city. Scattered houses could be seen, along with a few broken monuments. The majority of them seemed to have been eroded by the sand in the desert. "Where are we?" asked Hughes. "Xerxes. You mean the ancient country that suddenly disappeared overnight? The one and only. Interesting. So, why are we here?" "To learn, of course," replied Edward. "However, before that, we need to deal with a little trouble." He looked in one direction where a building was still intact. "Come out, I know that you're here." A group of people with brown skin and red eyes revealed themselves after his shout. "Ishvalans," said Hughes with a slight surprise. "Amestrian, leave this place, you are not welcome here," said one of the Ishvalan. Hughes lowered his head after hearing this. As a soldier who participated in the genocide of the Ishvalans people, he did not know how many of their kinds that he killed with his hands. So, he understood their anger and hatred. Edward looked at the ground and said, "First of all, I'm from Creta, so don't lump me with the atrocities that Amestris has committed." He was committed to maintaining his persona. "Second of all, there is going to be a big change going on in this destroyed city. If you can take advantage of the situation, maybe your kind will have the opportunity to rise again." The Ishvalan that spoke still looked at Edwards with hatred in his eyes. However, an older one placed his hand on the young lad's shoulder, then asked Edward, "Sir, could you elaborate on what you just said? Follow me if you want to know more." After that, he ignored the group and walked away. Hughes immediately ran after him. As for the old Ishvalan, he hesitated for a moment before deciding to follow. After walking a few meters away, Edward stopped, then his gate suddenly appeared in front of him. He waved his hand and his long wand appeared on his hand. He pointed the tip of the wand that had a philosopher's stone towards the gate and said, "Takni Akf." Immediately, the dragon chant spell activated and a grey light flew the wand before hitting the gate. A powerful temporal force came out from the gate and expanded like a dome. The force surrounded a large portion of the desert. Then, a scene that shocked both Hughes and the Ishvalans occurred. The empty desert seemed to have rewind in time. Buildings started to appear, followed by people. "The power of blasphemy," muttered one of the Ishvalan, then he started praying to Ishvala, the gods that their people worshipped. "Oh my god. Are those the people of Xerxes?" asked Hughes. "Have you traveled back in time to 400 years ago?" "Of course not," replied Edward. "This is just a time record." However, after seeing the confused look on Hughes and the other people, he further explained, "Every event that has occurred in history has left its trace or record. What I did was capture that record from the river of time." Then, Edward walked to one of the people in the street. Oddly though, he just walked through him. "As you can see, none of these people are real, they are just remnants, echoes of the past." This was a spell that Edward developed to learn about the events of the past without traveling there and risking messing things up. Unfortunately, there is currently still a limit to how far he can go back, otherwise, he would have long learned about the catastrophe that destroyed the Lemurian civilization 12,000 years ago. Additionally, this spell can also be used by the Empire when solving crimes. However, only when the crime reaches a certain level of influence or danger will this spell be used. Even then, a special division called the Time Auror will be dispatched to overview the process. Edward established the Time Auror to prevent any wizards or foreign civilizations from using time magic or technology to kill him or destroy the Empire. Although he properly controlled all the time turners, he did not know whether some escaped the net, or if someone could recreate them. So, to be safe, he established the Time Auror, a police force in charge of protecting the Empire's timeline. Meanwhile, Hughes seemed to have understood his words, but not really. So, he moved on and asked, "So, what's the point of doing this?" "Like I said before, to learn. Although we cannot interact with these people, we can learn their knowledge. For example, if you listen to a lecture about alchemy, you can still retain that knowledge." The people of Xerxes were very advanced for their time. Edward then looked at the Ishvalans. "You can learn many trades from this place, like plantation, masonry, irrigation, and a bunch of knowledge that could help your people survive in the desert, and even one day, rebuild some sort of civilization." After saying that, Edward waved his hand and a map appeared in front of Hughes and the older Ishvalan. The map displayed different areas where they could learn different trades. Then, he headed straight for the nearest alchemist. As for Hughes, he pondered for a moment before deciding to learn about governing, philosophy, and the military. Edward proceeded to walk to every alchemist of Xerxes, and using this magic, he experienced their entire lives from birth to death. He read every book they read, witnessed all their experiments, and accessed all their results. Finally, he met the alchemist that made the homunculi currently known as Father. However, back then, he was only called the dwarf in the flask. As Edward watched how the dwarf was created, he muttered, "So, that's the reason that he has so much advanced alchemy knowledge, a part of him was from the Eye of God. Now, the question is whether this Eye of God is an entirely different entity, or is it just another part of truth," thought Edward. However, he quickly shook his head to remove this thought from his mind. He was strong enough to find the answer to this question. And even if he wanted to, he must wait until he returns home where truth's power might be limited. So, he started to wonder whether to use this method to connect Morgana to the Eye of God so that she can gain unknown knowledge about alchemy just like the dwarf. Chapter 144 Xing. After pondering about it for a while, he decided not to do so. After all, if he succeeded, Morgana would form some kind of connection with the Eye of God, and this kind of thing might be dangerous. Furthermore, he would rather wait for him to discover the Akashic record and maybe find a way to connect Morgana to it so that she can get more magical knowledge instead of focusing on alchemy. Nevertheless, Edward still decided to make a new homunculus just like the dwarf in the flask so that he can get access to the latter's alchemy knowledge. After making a decision, he spent the next few days watching the interaction of the dwarf with slave number 23, which would later become Hohenheim, the father of Ed and Al.Feec. With the time magic, he watched as Hohenheim grew from a lowly slave to a noble in the Xerxes country through being an intellectual. He learned all the things that the dwarf taught him in the process. Finally came the day of Xerxes' destruction. Edward suddenly appeared in front of Hughes and the Ishvalans, who were surprised at how they suddenly disappeared from their locations to appear here. "I'm sure that you have learned plenty of things in the past few days," asked Edward. Just like, he granted these Ishvalans the ability to witness a person's life from beginning to end so that they can learn many things rather quickly. "Sir, thank you for your kindness. Our people will never forget," said the old Ishvalan. "We do not have anything to offer as repayment, so all I can do is pray that Ishvala protects you in your life." Edward nodded as he accepted their blessing. Although he was not religious, he can still accept people's kindness. He snapped his finger, then the Ishvalans discovered that everything had returned to normal. The lively capital of Xerxes was gone, replaced by the desolate desert. Meanwhile, Edward flew away in the sky with Hughes being dragged along with him. Unlike the Ishvalans, the two of them could still see the time record of Xerxes. "Why did you prevent them from continuing seeing your illusion thingy?" asked Hughes as he marveled at the fact that he was currently floating in the air. Although he was afraid at first, he quickly calmed down to enjoy the process. "Because what's about to happen next is not something that they need to know," replied Edward calmly. "What's about to happen? You mean the destruction of Xerxes?" However, no one answered him, so Hughes quickly looked down, and what he saw shocked him to the core. "That's the nationwide transmutation that I discovered in Amestris." "That's correct. The same person who destroyed Xerxes wants to reenact the same process to Amestris. How is that possible? Xerxes was destroyed more than 400 years ago." However, Edward ignored him. He just finished scanning the entire transmutation circle, so he waved his hand before the two of them disappeared. Soon, the two appeared in the palace of the king of Xerxes, where they first noticed another transmutation circle. Edward went to study the circle, while Hughes started to listen to the conversation of the people inside. That's when he learned that this so-called dwarf in the flask tricked the Xerxes king into creating this nationwide transmutation circle in an attempt to use the lives of all the people of the country to turn himself into a human philosopher's stone and attain immortality. However, the dwarf lied to the king about where exactly the center of the circle was, thus killing him along with all the citizens of Xerxes and attaining immortality instead along with Hohenheim. "How could he do this?" "That's more than 1 million lives," said Hughes. He paused for a moment, then said with a horrified look. "Amestris currently has a population of about 50 million, if that person succeeds, then so many people will lose their lives. Feec. Instantly, Hughes became agitated as he wanted to quickly return home to warn his friends and family. Also, to find a way to stop this catastrophe from even happening. Edward raised his head and looked at him. "I can tell you that if you return home right now, you and your family will be immediately killed without any suspense." "Why is that?" "You see that guy over there that looked exactly like Hohenheim?" Hughes nodded as he knew that this was a fleshly body that the dwarf made for himself after attaining immortality. He is the one who created the country of Amestris for the sole purpose of killing all its citizens one day and becoming a god. As such, the entire country's military is under his control. Even your Führer is a homunculus created by him to accomplish his goal. So, tell me, if you return home, what can you do to stop him?" Hughes clenched both his teeth and hands after hearing this. He could imagine that there were only a few people in the military he could trust, but these people do not have any power to change the situation. Edward shook his head after seeing him like this. He was not telling lies. After the Elric brothers discovered the truth about the nationwide transmutation circle, the only reason that they were not killed was that the homunculi needed them as a sacrifice for their plans to work. Even then, their loved ones were captured as hostages. A person like Hughes that the homunculi viewed as not important will immediately be killed along with his family if they ever discovered that he was not dead. After realizing his weakness and incompetence, Hughes calmed down and decided to trust Edward's words. After all, the latter told him that some people will eventually stop this dwarf. He looked at Edward and asked, "So, what exactly are you doing?" "Learning." "What would you want to learn such taboo knowledge?" asked Hughes with vigilance. "It's only taboo if used in the wrong way," replied Edward calmly as he continued to analyze the circle. Right now, a crazy idea on how to reach the Akashic record was slowly brewing in his mind. He knew that for his plan to succeed, he would need to mobilize the strength of the entire empire and use a lot of resources. And in the end, he might fail, leading to catastrophe. After figuring this out, he did not extinguish his idea but decided to be more cautious and take his time. "All right, I'm done. We can now leave." He waved his staff and the time record spell was lifted, thus returning things to their natural state. Following this, he immediately apparat with Hughes to the Qing Empire, instantly crossing the entire desert. Chapter 145 Alkahestry. After arriving at Qing, Edward did not just enter the country like it was his home, he visited the embassy and showed his visa. Although this country received few visitors because they were all the way east and separated by a vast desert, they still had an embassy. Additionally, after showing that he was an alchemist, the reception he received became quite welcoming, too welcoming one might say. "Wow, I did not know that the people of Qing were so welcoming to outsiders, truly remarkable people," said Hughes after attending a banquet held by the ambassador of Qing. "They are not," replied Edward calmly. "What do you mean?" "The emperor of Qing is dying. So, he is currently searching for a way to achieve immortality. The only reason that they are so welcoming to us is because of the possibility that I might know a way as a foreign alchemist." "Immortality, huh? That sounds like a recipe for disaster," said Hughes with a frown on his face. "Be prepared. In a few days, we should be summoned by the emperor." Just like Edward predicted, a few days later, the ambassador came to see them with the news that the emperor wanted to see them. The next day, Edward and Hughes attended a large banquet held by the Qing emperor himself. The banquet was full of food, people playing the zither, dancing. In general, the atmosphere was jovial. As for the emperor, he was a middle-aged man with long hair and beard wearing a long yellow dress with dragons embroidered on them. His complexion was a little pale as he sat on a golden chair also decorated with dragons on it. With only a glance, Edward could tell that this man was close to death due to illness. Most likely, he spent a lot of effort and energy to get out of bed and attend this banquet. "Mr. Edward." "Is Mr. the appropriate word used in the West?" said the emperor. "That's fine, Your Majesty." "Well, I have a question. Are you a member of royalty?" "Huh? No, I'm just an alchemist. I'm only asking because the way you conduct yourself seems like a person of high power." In fact, it was not just the emperor who felt that way. Even Hughes sometimes has the same feeling he had when meeting with Führer Bradley when dealing with Edward. "No, I'm just an alchemist, fnu.co. "I see. So, to what I owe the honor of this visit?" "I have traveled the world to learn about different countries' alchemy. In my voyage, I have heard about Qing's alkahestry and its wonderful healing abilities, so I came to learn," replied Edward. "Of course, I know that alchemist follows the laws of equivalent exchange. So, I will also exchange my knowledge of alchemy." After saying this, he clapped his hands together before placing them in the air. Electric light flashed from them, then the space in the banquet trembled and a rift opened up. Beyond the rift, the people saw a vast library beyond anything they have ever seen. "This is my library. In exchange for knowledge about Qing's alkahestry, Your Majesty can choose people to enter and learn from it." The Qing emperor looked at the magical sight in front of him, then a look of greed flashed from his eyes before returning to normal. With a calm look on his face, he said, "It would be my honor to have an exchange with a powerful alchemist like you. Give me a few days, I will summon all the alkahestrists of the empire and the exchange can begin." "In that case, I will gladly await that day," replied Edward. The banquet continued with everyone having a peaceful and enjoyable time. Then, Edward and Hughes returned to the house that they were assigned to by the emperor. "Hey, are you sure you should show that emperor all the knowledge you have?" asked Hughes. "This guy does not look like a good person." "You are right about that. However, if I did not do something to lure him in, he would probably not show us the empire real knowledge about alkahestry. He would probably show us some basic knowledge while trying to get everything from us." "Why do I feel like you're playing with fire?" "You think too much. I could easily take down this entire country by myself," replied Edward with an arrogant tone. Of course, Hughes did not believe him. Soon, 3 days passed by. Edward thought that the process would take at least a week or more, but the Qing emperor was ruthless and ordered all these alchemists to rush to the capital as soon as possible. So, Edward had a comprehensive exchange with these alchemists inside his library that he placed inside a dimension that he created after analyzing gluttony. Inside a circle, a little bunny who had a deep cut on his back laid motionless, looking at its surroundings with fear. Edward activated the circle and soon afterward, the fresh wound on the bunny's back was instantly cured. My theory was correct. Alkahestry used life energy from the planet to heal living creatures. The dragon pulse is essentially the life force that connects all living things as one. By using this connection or through the flow of energy, they can project their transmutation circle over long distance. Izumi Curtis's theory of all for one for all is the Western version of the dragon pulse. Of course, alkahestry was not only used for medicinal purposes but could also be used the same way as amestris alchemy. The only difference is the energy used in the process. Whether it is alchemy or alkahestry, they both use some form of energy that is underground or underneath the earth. In my world, mana exists underneath the earth. So, logically speaking, alchemists should be able to extract mana from the ley line nodes to perform magic. And since all people have a gate of truth and are capable of performing alchemy, they should also be able to perform magic. However, if these people were on a planet that did not have ley line nodes, they would immediately lose the ability to perform magic. .cm. Well, I'll have to check if that is feasible when I return. After waking up from his thinking, Edward took a bunch of herbs and placed them on a separate circle. After activating it, all the herbs were decomposed and recombined into a pill. He took the pill and swallowed it. Immediately afterward, he felt a powerful life force from the pill traveling to his lungs trying to heal it. Of course, since he was healthy, the pill just dissolved itself without much result. However, if his lungs had any problems, this pill would be greatly beneficial. While Edward was doing his little test, all these alchemists from Xing looked at with shock. Pill refining was one of the highest levels of alkahestry and only one person in Xing currently had that ability, the Imperial Doctor. The Imperial Doctor was the only reason that the current emperor was still alive. However, this foreign alchemist only took 3 days to reach such a level. Edward did not care about these people's looks. To him, amestris alchemy was very similar to the Empire's transmutation magic except more organized, with a better system, and easier to use. As for Xing's alkahestry, it was basically a form of potion since they mostly deal with herbs and stuff. Adding to that the fact that some Eastern wizards in the Empire tried making pills instead of potions, he has sufficient knowledge regarding the subject. So, learning and mastering alkahestry was quite easy for him. As such, after digesting the knowledge about the subject, he focused on studying their understanding of qi. He had an idea that might create a completely new system for the Empire, and if he succeeds, he will deal with a major issue that wizards faced. Chapter 146 Aura Master. During the past few days, Edward not only learned about alkahestry but also about Xing's understanding of qi, like how to use it to augment the body, how to sense it from your opponent, and how to mask it to hide your presence. Adding to that the knowledge he learned from the homunculi wrath, he has developed a good method for the people of the Empire to break the limit of their bodies besides genetic modification which has a high failure rate. However, Edward was not satisfied, he wanted to create a new power system based on qi. After research, he realized that his method had an upper limit which happened to be the level of wrath. In other words, through training, ordinary people can only reach the level of strength of the homunculi wrath. This level was actually quite high since the man could dodge an attack from a tank. More than that, he even used a sword to cut a rocket launcher from said tank. This kind of strength is similar to people in the Empire that underwent their second genetic modification, which is quite powerful. Nevertheless, he was not satisfied yet, especially since this method had little value to wizards and mages that can strengthen their bodies with mana. So, he had an idea, what if he could merge mana with qi to form a new kind of energy that has the same physical benefit as qi? Of course, this energy should not have a limit. To achieve his goal, Edward excused himself from these Xing alchemists and secretly entered his dimension.ee.com. In a white room, Edward held 2 swords from his hand as he trained. During the process, his eyes were closed as he felt the qi or life energy circular inside his body, along with the mana in his core and other organs. He controlled the 2 of them to merge, and the process was easier than he anticipated. Unfortunately for him, his man just swallowed the qi without having any changes. So, Edward changed to a different ratio and tried again, he failed this time as well. So, he tried changing the frequency of his mana, while at the same time trying different ratios of mana to qi. Time seemed irrelevant to him as he continued to swing his sword, then, after countless trial and error, he mixed the perfect ratio and the exact frequency. So, a change occurred in his body as a new form of energy was created. Edward opened his eyes and he gazed at his hand, he could feel an invisible white energy surrounding his hand. On instinct, he chopped one of the swords with his bare hand. Bang! The sword made of pure steel was cut in 2, which slightly surprised Edward as he did not use much force. In fact, he used the force equivalent to an ordinary adult. The reason that the sword was cut in half was because he concentrated this new energy into his hand which allowed him to have such destructive power. Immediately afterward, Edward controlled this energy to his legs, muscles and bones, then, with the force of an ordinary person, jumped in the air. And to his surprise, he actually jumped more than 5 meters. Morgana, said Edward out loud. Yes, master, said the purple-haired little elf. Create a new file and name this energy aura. Now, let's begin an overall test. As you command, master. After that, Edward and Morgana did a comprehensive evaluation of aura and how to use it. So, what's the result? Asked Edward. It seems that aura can exist in the body without the need to have a special place to hold it like the magic core. It flows to every part of the body, from the skin all the way to the cells. And so far, we have not found a limit to its quantity like mana. Interesting. We can do some tests later on whether we can create an aura core in the body and the possible consequences. What else? So far, aura seems to function as a more advanced form of chi, however, based on our initial analysis, there are some differences. Like? Aura is a weaponized version of chi, so increasing it cannot increase lifespan, or at the very least, it is not as good. That's not a problem. The main reason that I created this system is so that wizards have a way to fight in close combat, and to have another method to defend themselves in case their mana runs out. In that case, Master, you have succeeded. Aura can exist in the body without mana. As long as it is created, it does not need mana to maintain its existence. However, if you want to increase the amount of aura inside your body, you still need to absorb mana and life force. Edward frowned after hearing this. There should be a way for ordinary people who do not have mana inside their bodies to use aura. Alright, let's do some tests. He entered his gate and took out a muggle prisoner. He injected his mana inside his body and mixed it with the prisoner's chi with the appropriate ratio. Excellent, aura was born. He then proceeded to do the same to another prisoner. However, this one was different as he was a person who suffered from mana rejection syndrome, meaning that mana was poison to him, so, as long as it entered his body, he would become sick. After injecting mana into the second prisoner's body, he winced in pain despite being in a coma. However, after the mana quickly mixed with his chi, it turned into aura. Well, this is a relief. This new system can be used by the people in the Empire that can sense mana but have mana rejection syndrome. Yes, although they cannot become mages, they can become Aura Master, replied Morgana. Aura Master? That's a good name. Glad you like it, Master. Edward nodded his head as he looked at these two prisoners. There is still a big problem, it is not universal enough. That's true. If an ordinary person that cannot sense mana wants to become an Aura Master, they would have to either rely on wizards or the Empire have to create machines that can install mana into their bodies. With our technological capabilities, it should not be a problem to do so. However, not everyone would be able to afford such a machine no matter how cheap we made them, analyzed Morgana. Edward agreed with her. In that case, let's see if there is another way to increase aura without the use of mana. Let's begin with intense training. Edward proceeded to place these two prisoners in a time dilation room inside the gate. 2 days later, 6 months passed inside that room. During those 6 months, while being controlled, all these prisoners did was intense training while also taking the necessary nutrition. How is the result? After monitoring them, their aura has indeed drastically increased. However, compared with the control group that absorbed mana, it was simply too slow. Edward frowned after hearing this. The Empire was already dealing with the issue of classicism and equality. He did not want to further aggravate the problem. In that case, let's try Plan B. By now, the mana trees should have been planted all over the world, thus making each planet in the solar system a maniful environment. What we have to do is create a method that allows Aura Masters to passively absorb mana from the environment without sensing it. I'm on it, Master. Edward nodded his head and prepared to observe this experiment. However, he received a message from Hughes. Since he told the latter not to disturb him unless something important came up, he checked it. The Qing Emperor wants to see you. So, you finally could not wait, muttered Edward before leaving the dimension and returning to the real world. Chapter 147, False Immortality. After Edward left his dimensions and returned to his manor, he quickly discovered someone from the palace waiting for him. Without saying anything, he entered the carriage that the palace sent and went to see the Empire. This time, their meeting was not in an open hall, but in a private garden with only him and the Emperor. Of course, Edward could feel the chi of countless people hiding in the dark. Although they tried to hide their presence, they could not hide from his senses. After meeting with the Qing Emperor, they had a casual chat where the Emperor displayed his charm and asked Edward whether he was satisfied with the Qing people's reception. Of course, Edward, who was knowledgeable in politics, also answered with a smile on his face and greatly complimented His Highness Empire and his people. However, midway through their conversation, the Emperor casually asked, Sir Edward, you are a very knowledgeable alchemist that has traveled all over the world. Have you never thought about your mortality? If it was an ordinary person, they might think that this Emperor was just chatting casually about different topics. Of course, I have. However, death is an inevitable thing for all life. That may be true, but have you never thought about researching immortality? Immortality, huh? One time, indeed, I was intrigued by the subject. Oh, and what was your discovery? The only information I discovered was the fact that a 15th-century Amestrian alchemist named Nicholas Flamel believed that the Philosopher's Stone could grant him immortality and did research on it. However, from what I know, he's dead, so he most likely failed. Renew.cm. Is that so? What a shame. Then, the Emperor did not mention this topic again and continued his casual chat with Edward until the latter was dismissed. As soon as Edward left, the gentle smile on the Qing Emperor's face was replaced by a solemn one. What do you think? He spoke out loud, seeming to talk to himself. Your Majesty, he is lying, responded another voice from the shadow. How so? When this man first came, I felt the chi on his body, it was like a walking sundew to how vast it was. Although he has now learned to hide it, it does not change this fact. This abundant amount of qi is not something a normal person can have. And with such vast qi, it should be possible for him to live for a couple hundred if not 1,000 years. The Qing emperor frowned after hearing this, then he asked, "Did you find anything in his library?" The person in the shadow paused for a few seconds before saying, "We did find a kind of false pseudo-immortality." "What does that mean?" "Be more straightforward. The method we discovered involved binding a person's soul to a suit of armor. That armor will have no need for food, sleep, and does not age. Even if it is destroyed, as long as the place where the soul is sealed is still intact, it can be rebuilt. I'm guessing that there are other downsides to this method besides not being able to experience the pleasures of the flesh," said the emperor. "Yes. According to the notes, the suit of armor will eventually reject the soul, thus leading to death. However, the notes mentioned that the soul can be transferred to another suit of armor after the rejection. How long can this process last?" 7 times. The soul can stay bonding to the armor for 100 years maximum based on the alchemist's skill. After that, it has to be transferred to another suit. Finally, the soul can only be transferred 7 times before reaching its limit. "So, this method could only give me 700 years of life," replied the Qing emperor as he pondered deeply. "Since I can transfer my soul to a suit, couldn't I also transfer it to another body?" According to the notes, the rejection of this process is more severe than a suit. Another body can last between 3 months to 5 years maximum before being rejected, and the amount of time that the soul can be transferred still remains at 7. The Qing emperor nodded his head as he pondered what to do. Meanwhile, after leaving the palace, Edward returned home to see Hughes having dinner. He seemed to enjoy Xing's food. He looked at him and said, "It's time to go." "What? How come we have to leave so suddenly?" However, Edward was not looking at him, he was sensing the large number of people that already surrounded his manor. He mentally sighed. It seems that the Qing emperor was not satisfied with the method of immortality that I gave him. How greedy. Although Edward only gave him this method as both a thank you and an experiment to study how the souls of the people of this world are different from the people of his world, it was still a real method. Meanwhile, Hughes, who did not know what was going on, was quite shocked when the house that they were living in suddenly exploded, creating a cloud of smoke made of dust. And once the wind blew it away, he discovered a strange shield surrounding him and Edward. Meanwhile, a large army of soldiers dressed in armor and holding knives and spears had surrounded them. "What's going on? I told you that the Qing emperor was dying, so he wanted to acquire immortality. What does that have to do with us? Wait, does he think that you have a way for him to become immortal?" "Apparently, so." "Well, do you?" "Of course I do, but I would never give it to him." Hughes looked at him up and down, then decided to change the subject. He looked at the army and asked, "So, what do we do now?" "We're in big trouble." Edward, who remained calm and composed during the entire situation, said, "It's a shame that I cannot kill people. Anyway, I can still give them a little lesson." He clapped his hand, which suddenly created a loud sonic wave attack. Then, more than 90% of the soldiers in this army screamed as they held their hands before falling on the ground, bleeding in their ears and noses. The remaining 10%, although still standing, were also bleeding from their orifices. Although these soldiers were not dead, they won't be getting back up anytime soon. Immediately after that, Edward and Hughes disappeared from Qing, nowhere to be found. Of course, this was not the end of this incident. Soon after their disappearance, the Qing emperor collapsed. His health rapidly deteriorated at an alarming rate, and no matter what the royal alchemists did, they could not prevent this from happening. In the end, out of desperation, they tried to place his soul in a suit of armor to prolong his life. Unfortunately for them, during the process, a mysterious power suddenly prevented the emperor's soul from leaving his body. He was forced to remain bedridden until it was time for him to die of natural cause. Chapter 148: Existential Crisis. After leaving Qing, Edward did not go anywhere specific, he just teleported to his dimension and continued his work. A few days later, while taking a break, Edward sat in a chair in a room with a large screen in front of him. On this screen, he watched everything that the Elric brothers went through after their last meeting. And to his astonishment, almost everything occurred as it did in the original anime. His involvement had only a little impact on the overall story. Although this was what he wanted, he felt that something was wrong. Cm. Morgana, did you discover any correcting force of fate, like the one in our world? No, master. Everything seemed normal. Edward frowned after hearing this. This could only mean two things: either there is no power of fate existing in this world and the fact that everything happened like it was supposed to despite his intervention is merely a coincidence. Or, Morgana is incapable of noticing the power capable of guiding everything back on his original track. Of course, Edward believed that the second option is the best explanation. The entire Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood anime can be interpreted as a game between God, Truth, and humans, the Elric brothers. Truth believed that humans or alchemists have become arrogant and boastful as they push the boundaries of science by conducting inhuman experiments. Even when they know that human transmutation is taboo, many still decide to play God by trying to revert the power of death. So, Truth always punished these people severely and in an ironic way. For example, Edward Elric was trying to revive his mother, which was the pillar of their family. So, in retaliation, Truth took Edward's leg or his pillar to stand. Azumi Curtis wanted to bring her child back from the dead. In return, her ability to conceive children was taken away from her. To Edward, the whole story is essentially Truth trying to see whether humans can learn from their mistakes, acknowledge their limitations, and respect the laws of nature. And in the end, when Edward Elric chose to sacrifice his gate of truth and lose the ability to perform alchemy to save his brother, he finally humbled himself and accepted the fact that he was just an ordinary human and should never try to play God. This is one of the reasons that in the end, Truth told him that he beat him. Edward finally won the game. Meanwhile, Father or the dwarf in the flask who never learned any lessons during the game served as a foil to the Elric brothers, and he was punished severely for his actions. Rew.c. All these thoughts quickly flashed across Edward's mind as he watched the videos. To him, only Truth may be able to slowly control fate to this extent and ensure that things develop as they should. However, Edward still had many questions. To be precise, his theory still had many flaws. For example, why did Truth allow him to intervene if his actions had no significance whatsoever? Could it be that it was trying to teach Edward a lesson as well? Or, because he did not intervene that much in the story, his impact was not enough to create large ripples in this timeline? Thinking of this, Edward quickly looked through the videos, focusing on the things that did change because of him. The first change was related to the homunculus, Greed. In the original timeline, he was not discovered by the other homunculi until the Battle of Dubleth when he was killed by Wrath after capturing Al. However, since the homunculi suspected that he was the one to inform Edward of their plans after he was dissected by Edward and released, he was tracked down and almost killed. However, he managed to escape. Unfortunately, things did not change much after that. Obsessed with finding a way to place his soul in armor like Al as a form of immortality, he still kidnapped him. And in the end, Wrath still discovered and captured him in Dubleth. And like the original timeline, he was swallowed by Father and remade into a new homunculus. The second thing that changed was that after the Elric brothers returned to see their teacher, they learned that their formula for human transmutation was flawed, and what they summoned was not even their mother. According to the original timeline, they learned this fact from their father Hohenheim, then told their teacher. The third and final thing that changed was after Ed was accidentally swallowed by gluttony along with Lin Yao, he was not as desperate as he was in the original timeline. That's because he instantly remembered Edward's little talk about teleportation and knew a way out. However, he was still hesitating on what toll to pay once he opened the gate again. After knowing about this, the Qing prince Lin Yao did not hesitate to ask Ed to use some parts of his body as a toll. According to him, he was completely fine with living with an auto-male. In the end, Envy discovered them while they were bickering, and Ed just like the original decided to compromise his morals and used Envy's philosopher's stone as a toll. After that, everything was the same as usual, whether it was Lust's death, Scar's meeting with Mei Chong, and all the political plots involving Colonel Mustang and the higher-ups of the military. As Edward watched all these happening, a sudden thought came to his mind. He once read a novel in his past life about a place called the God Space that randomly chose ordinary people from Earth and sent them into movies, films, and anime worlds with specific missions. And after these people complete the missions, the timeline of the world will be restarted and a new group of people will be sent again. One thing that caught his attention about this novel was the reason that the powerful being who created the God Space sent these people into these worlds. The reason was that by destroying the established plot or destiny of these worlds, these entities could absorb the source of the entire world to increase their strength. As for how this applies to him? Well, Edward has always wondered the reason he was miraculously reincarnated into the world of Harry Potter. Now, he was wondering if some powerful being was also using him for some purpose and he did not even know about it. These kinds of thoughts brought Edward a great deal of existential dread, but he quickly placed these thoughts in the back of his head. He knew that he tended to be paranoid, so he did not think about it any longer. Anyway, if his conjecture is true, there is currently nothing he can do about it now. So, all he can do is move forward and become powerful, then the truth will eventually be revealed. After that, he ordered Morgana to keep watching these events unfold as he continued his research. He ignored the little elf's complaint that he was beginning to develop some voyeuristic tendencies and took out a special notebook. It was Scar's brother's notes on the combination of Zinji's alkahestry and Amestrian alchemy. This book contained how to reverse the control Father had over the tectonic energy which granted him the ability to deprive alchemists of their powers. __________________________________________________________________________ Chapter 149 Fort Briggs. Edward Elric sat in a medical room while listening to a female doctor telling him about how he needed to have a special automail because of the cold weather in the north, otherwise, he would freeze to death. He placed his clothes back on, then complained about how he was forced to pay 100 cents for coffee that was not that good. Then, the door suddenly opened with 3 people walking in. Mr. Bones, you're also here? Oh, it's Edward number 2. How have you been doing? You know this individual, interrupted a beautiful woman with long blonde hair wearing a blue army uniform. While standing, she exuded an air of dominance and authority. Major General Armstrong, saluted the doctor. At ease, replied Olivier before looking at the Elric brothers. Answer my question. We've met him before and he helped save the lives of a friend of ours. But, General, how do you know him, replied Ed. A few days ago, this man showed up here and I thought he was a spy, so I tried to capture him. Unfortunately, he single-handedly defeated all my men and with no effort. Ed and Al were momentarily surprised, however, after thinking about how knowledgeable of an alchemist he was, they thought that it made sense. Mr. Bones, I thought you were headed to Xing, asked Al. I am, but I decided to visit the north beforehand. The reason that Edward lied was that he knew that these two were looking for Mei Chong to learn alchemy, and if they knew that he already visited there, they might ask him instead. Edward has no problem teaching them. Over the years, he has discovered that he had a passion for teaching. Nevertheless, since he decided not to interfere too much with the plot, he decided to avoid them for now. Meanwhile, Olivier looked at these people happily chatting like acquaintances, coughed out loud to get everyone's attention, then she proceeded to ask the Elric brothers about their attention for coming to Fort Briggs. And just like in the anime, she did not cuddle these brothers even though they were children. She deserved the title of Ice Queen, thought Edward to himself. After the conversation ended, Olivier asked her men to give the brothers a job, then she left the medical room. Edward along with Captain Buccaneer followed her. Those two boys haven't exactly had easy lives, General, said the captain as he secretly looked at Edward. His eyes showed that he was both on guard against him, as well as worship and a little fear. I believe that they may have witnessed some carnage in their times. But I can tell that on the inside they remain soft and weak. And what's more, those two have a secret they aren't telling us. Olivier then looked at Edward who magically had some weird fruit bag on his hand and ate it nonchalantly. Her intuition told her that he knew something. Soon, the three of them reached Olivier's office. Edward and she entered while the captain remained on guard outside. While still eating, Edward looked at the general on her chair and asked, "So, have you thought about my offer?" She looked at him with a serious face for a moment before saying, "You randomly appeared out of nowhere. Tell me that you're a wizard from another world and an emperor to a vast empire. Then, you offered me to become your concubine and promised me to lead an army, unlike anything I could possibly imagine. Tell me, if you were a normal person, how would you feel?" Edward pondered for a moment. "Well, you have a point. How about I show you some proof first? I would appreciate that very much." Nodding his head, he made a downward motion in the air, then a space fissure occurred before a gate suddenly appeared in the room. Looking at the general that was trying hard to retain her composure, Edward smiled and said, "After you." Olivier paused for a moment, then she stood up from her chair and walked inside the gate while Edward followed her. For a brief moment, she could only see white, making her eyes a little hard to adjust. Then, Olivier saw something that she could not describe with words. She was in a room and in front of her were countless large rectangular metallic structures. She estimated that the smallest of them was at least 3 kilometers long. "What are those things?" asked Olivier. "They're spaceships," replied Edward. However, after seeing the confusion in her face, he added, "I forget that the technology of this world is still in World War I. Think of it as a tank that can fly." Olivier nodded as she understood. Meanwhile, Edward snapped his finger, then the two of them suddenly appeared inside one of the medium-sized ships, inside the control room. "Morgana, take control of the ship." "As you wish, master." Countless lights suddenly turned themselves on, and not long afterward, the ship started to levitate. During the process, Olivier tried her best to remain composed and not show any surprise on her face. She had her pride to maintain. Even though she had many questions, she did not immediately ask. After seeing this, Edward mentally nodded his head. One of the reasons he wanted Olivier to become his wife was not just because of her beauty, but because of her military leadership ability and composure during difficult times. In the future, the Empire's Marine Fleet will be one of the most powerful military divisions. As such, he wanted the majority of control of such a force to be in the hands of the royal family. If Olivier becomes his wife, he would be relieved to have her take control. Rew.c. Of course, not now. Only after they have established a certain level of trust and affection. "Morgana, go to the testing site and use the lowest level of attack," commanded Edward. Following this, Olivier discovered that the environment suddenly changed and she was now floating in the air above a deserted plain with nothing in sight. A screen suddenly appeared in front of her showing a cannon that was pointing at the plan underneath. A white light flew from the cannon and hit the ground. Boom! A massive explosion occurred, and for the first time, Olivier displayed shock on her face. The reason for that was the fact that this attack was powerful enough to destroy the entire country of Amestris. "Are you telling me that this is the lowest level of attack?" she asked in a solemn tone. "Yes. Unless you switch to target mode, which is designed to attack single individuals." Olivier took a deep breath to calm herself down. She has spent a great deal of her life guarding the northern borders, and she thought that she has seen many things. But nothing compared to this. This single ship had the power to easily destroy the country of Amestris. No, it could take over the world with no effort whatsoever. No one could stop it. And this man had dozens if not hundreds of them lying in a room. Is this the most powerful army of your empire? Technology-wise, yes, replied Edward. However, in terms of size, this is not even considered a small fleet. At this point, Olivier was a little numb to being surprised. Can you tell me a little about your empire? No problem, replied Edward with a slight smirk on his face. Chapter 150 Decision. Edward raised his hand and approached Olivier. If you do not mind? She frowned for a moment before nodding her head. As such, he gently placed his hands near her temples. This is going to hurt. Immediately afterward, countless pieces of information poured into her mind. After only slightly grunting, she quickly processed the information and learned a basic understanding of the arcane empire. From what magic was to the development of technology, and even a little bit of history. Of course, it was not like she was privy to highly classified information, she was only granted enough knowledge to know what it was like to be an ordinary citizen of the empire. And even then, the information was only the bare minimum. At this point, Edward is working under the assumption that Truth might know everything about him. Even then, he still decided to remain cautious. Olivier took a few minutes to process all the information inside her mind. I did not think that you were such an impressive individual, Iway.co. I do alright for myself. You know, sometimes humbleness can be seen as cockiness to others. I've been told that many times. Oliver glances at him, then she begins to ponder for her next action or decision. So, you're just going to let me be in charge of such a powerful force? Just like that? In the information she received, she saw a space fleet leaving the solar system, and she was truly amazed. Edward shook his head, and after seeing this, Olivier frowned. Are you going back on your words? That's not it. Although with my power, I can indeed make you the commander of the Empire's marine force. However, I will have to deal with the political force that comes with it, and that's too much trouble that I don't care to deal with. So, I plan to allow you to enter a fleet and become an ordinary soldier. Through war, you can slowly climb the rank. And when the opportunity arrives, I will appoint you as the chief commander of the marine force. No one would dare to question. Aren't you afraid of people talking? What if the masses do not accept your decision? Edward looked deep into her eyes. You seem to have misunderstood something. This is my empire and I can do what I want with it. The only reason that I want you to go through all that trouble is that it will be easier for you to control such a large governmental body, and also because I'm too lazy to slowly deal with these politicians. Otherwise, I could just appoint you for the position, then send a while to appease some of them. Heck, if I wanted to, I can just appoint you and not care about their opinions. After complaining for a while, they'll just accept the fact. Oliver immediately understood Edward's meaning. As an emperor, he has absolute control over his empire. However, as a wise ruler, he understood the concept of not abusing such power or at least, not showing it so that it is easier to control the people and prevent them from constantly rebelling. After that, Olivier took more than half an hour to ponder Edward's offer, then she said, unfortunately, I still have to decline. Tell me your reason, replied Edward calmly. First, I have a duty to Amestris. Even though compared to your arcane empire it is a weak country, it is where I was born and raised. My goal and dream have always been to lead it to prosperity. Loyalty to one country, that's a good reason. So, what's the second? The second reason is the fact that there is no emotional connection between us. I've only met you for a few days and you cannot expect me to marry you. Although you are truly handsome, and more importantly, very strong, this does not change anything. I did not expect that the mighty Ice Queen would care about love. How shocking, said Edward with a smirk. Unfortunately, Oliver ignored him. Finally, now there is the fact that you have more than 4 wives. Edward nodded his head, then said, anything else? No, that's about it. In that case, I have a solution to your concerns. When it comes to your duty to Amestris, I have no problem waiting for you to accomplish your goals before we leave. Anyway, even if it takes you 50 years and you become an old woman, I can still revert you to your youth. By then, as long as you do not have any more attachment to Amestris, I can take you and your family to leave. Olivier squinted her eyes and asked, how old are you exactly? Well, my physical age is probably over 60. However, my real age is probably over 200 years. How does that make sense? Well, I've traveled through time a few times, I've also hibernated for a long time. So, it's hard to count. Anyway, I'm immortal so I don't really care that much. Olivier looked at the young man who looked no more than 20 years old and a little shock quickly flashed in her eyes. Although she knew that his empire was capable of many unimaginable things, she did not expect them to have found a way to achieve immortality. So, how can you deal with the other 2 concerns? When it comes to your second concern, well, just like the first one, time is the only way to deal with it. In the next few years, as you deal with your political ambitions, we can get to know one another and build an emotional base for our relationship. Edward paused for a moment, then he continued, as for your last concern, unfortunately, there is nothing I can do about that. As you can imagine, I'm a womanizer and I have no intention of changing my ways. So, if you accept my terms, you have to slowly accept this flaw of mine. And if you cannot, then that can only mean that the fate between us was not meant to be. Olivier began to ponder about this issue. She asked herself whether she could accept him having multiple women, and the answer was yes. Her idea was always the survival of the fittest, and the strong are respected. Since Edward is so strong, why can't he have as many women as he wants? I can accept that, but I have a condition. Please. If one day I become stronger than you, then you have to dismiss all your other wives. Edward placed his hand on his chin, caressing his non-existent beard. Although I know that they will be upset after hearing about this bet, I'm still tempted. So, I accept your offer.